Welcome everyone to Cinematic Realms. I'm your host Gwen. With me, as always, is Jared. And I just said to Jared, I feel like doing a countdown today. Like sometimes it gets the juices flowing, and makes it feel like when we start, it's like, all right, we're go. So
I always liked the countdown, and you
yeah,
also brought that back the original countdown music, because for a while there it had changed, but now, you know what? When it's a special occasion, sometimes you gotta bring the old hits back, whether it's Duel of the Fates or the old countdown music for Cinematic Realms.
yeah, I was so overjoyed, like because I had actually switched back to that while we still were doing the countdown regularly. And uh and and I was so happy when I discovered that for some reason I had downloaded the old countdown, and I'm so happy because the new one sucks.
Yeah.
It just doesn't have the build up to it. But anyway, that's enough talk about countdowns. Today we are going to be diving into the final four episodes of season one of Star Wars Maul, Shadow Lord. And I'm sad that the season is over, but we get to talk about it today. And I got to tell you, like, I rewatched these last four episodes today. I'm gonna be rewatching the whole season pretty soon here, because I just feel like this is gonna be one of the Star Wars shows that is incredibly rewatchable. Um, and yeah, I just loved it so much. So, how are you feeling as we get ready to dive into talking about these episodes?
I'm feeling great. I feel like we should also say up the top, Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out
Yes,
there. I will
happy
be
Mother's Day.
having dinner with my own lovely mother and dad later this evening. Um, Obviously, there's not as much of a tie-in for Mother's Day with the Maul show because Maul's mother is sadly no longer with us, Mother Talzin, and the one mother figure we get in this show, Riley Lawson's mom, Drea, not the greatest example of what to do. But
We get two dark side users who lost their mothers
yes,
fighting it out. So
yeah,
yeah,
okay. There's
there's a
the
dark
connection.
Mother's Day thing.
I was going to say, I think the last time when we did a stream on Father's Day, we talked about Batman Begins. That was kind of a funny, given how Batman is defined by the loss of his parents. Regardless, happier topics. This season's fucking great, man. I actually think this is one of the strongest seasons, like start to finish, of any Star Wars television show, live action or animated. And I agree, it'll probably be a rewatch staple for me going forward, partially also because it's relatively compact, only 10 episodes makes it easier, and they're only half an hour long. And also because it's so serialized, I feel like that makes it kind of, you feel like you want to watch the whole thing, whereas with certain other animated shows, it's easier to just go back and watch either an arc of Clone Wars or an episode of Rebels or the Bad Batch, or Resistance. But in this case, it just, this entire thing feels complete, even though like these last four episodes, and especially the last two, I'm like, this is pretty close to perfect Star Wars, I think, in the last. And I one of the other shows where I also feel kind of like, it's a rewatch staple for me, and I always feel like I have to watch the whole thing, is, fittingly enough, Obi-Wan Kenobi, because it's only 6 episodes. And I kind of feel like, given how linked Maul and Kenobi are, even if Kenobi's not as much of a presence in this show, it's like, it kind of makes sense that we have the light and the dark on this side. And guess who features in both? One Darth Vader.
I was gonna mention this later, but since you've brought up Obi-Wan Kenobi, I'm gonna go ahead and talk about it right off the bat. Yeah, we already dropped the bomb on that. So spoiler alert, Darth Vader, appears in these episodes. Um, I went back to watch Vader's entrance in episode 3 of Obi-Wan
Mm-hmm.
Kenobi the other day, and the thing these episodes do for that entrance is, like, I mean, it was that's a scary entrance before, as he's like, force choking people left and right, and but just because of the way he's portrayed in the finale of this season, just with the fact that he doesn't speak, he's just like a horror monster, just wrecking havoc, and he's just so terrifying. To then go from that to his entrance in Kenobi, it's like, oh fuck, oh fuck, oh fuck, oh fuck. So, like, yeah, it's really cool how there's connective tissue there, where and similarly, the way, to a lesser degree, the way that I think the way Merrick was portrayed in this season, makes his appearance in Ahsoka feel different too. And so it's just, I love the way that one one story can sort of influence how you perceive another one. And I just, but yeah, I remember coming out of watching these episodes and immediately being like, oh, I feel like I want to watch Vader in Kenobi now, to see how that feels.
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously that's what the Star Wars is particularly strong at, that, like, a kind of certain stories that come later, kind of providing additional context and additional emotional resonance for moments that had happened earlier in the story. And that's one of the things that we love so much about it. But in particular, yes, Vader's, specifically the way they use Vader, as kind of like the silent, menacing killer, and the kind of the unstoppable force and almost palpable aura of terror that he generates. There is, we get almost exactly the same thing in Obi-Wan in his entrance onto the village on Mapuzo. Obviously, one of the differences in that encounter is that ultimately in that episode Vader later speaks, and in the show he does not, for reasons I'm sure we can discuss. But that silent moment in when he enters the village, and then he senses Kenobi, and he's like almost stalking him, and then he basically starts inflicting horrific wanton violence on the innocent civilians present in the village in the hopes of drawing Kenobi out. And in this case, Vader also inflicts horrific wanton violence on several beloved characters. And it just goes to show you, obviously people also compare this to his scene in Rogue One, that even though one of the things we ultimately love about Darth Vader is his complexity, and how the fact that ultimately he is still Anakin Skywalker and he's not beyond redemption, but in this era of his life, he is truly a monster. And monsters are supposed to be terrifying, and they have successfully managed to make Darth Vader feel like the terrifying, unstoppable force that he is. And I think that is one of the reasons why his appearance in all of these shows and movies is so successful.
Yeah, and I was going to say, you mentioned the fact that he actually does speak in that episode of Obi-Wan Kenobi, but I think actually that makes it even more impactful, the fact that for Obi-Wan he'll open his
Yeah.
mouth, because he almost like can't help himself, but when it's somebody that he doesn't have that emotional connection to, he's just a killing machine, and he has nothing to say, because it's beside the point. He's just a killing machine. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that because it was very much on my mind. And yeah, and now I feel like it makes me want to watch that entire series again, just because I feel like these final episodes gave us not that we haven't pictured Vader as a killing machine. You mentioned Rogue One, and and all the storytelling of Star Wars, but I just feel like this gave us a new angle on it, to see him like Vader in his prime, as much as, you know, one can be in their prime when they're on using a giant respirator. But this is like truly killing machine Vader at his height. Um, you know, when he's filled with the most rage. And so it makes me want to revisit Obi-Wan Kenobi, because it's not as early, but it's relatively close. It's still younger Vader. Um, and so yeah, that just makes me excited to do that. Um, but anyway, so the Vader stuff happens in the, you know, the final episodes. But we've got 4 episodes to talk about here, um and a lot happens. This is shit hitting the fan. Emotional turmoil, all kinds of stuff. I will say that, um, I guess I'll you know, sort of start off just talking about the fact that I think episode 7 caught me off guard, because I feel like we had kind of gotten used to a pattern somewhat with these 2 episode drops. Of the first one is kind of a bit slower and build up. Let's find out about the characters, and then the next episode there's some big action sequences, and it's the thrill ride. And it was kind of the reverse this time, although there's still plenty of action uh, in episode 8. But with episode 7, they really sort of hit the ground running, where you know, the Empire, you know, tracks down Maul, and Devon, and the hideaway, and then it's just like mayhem, and like, you know, dire circumstances, like right off the bat. And then we get episode 8, and it's going through, you know, delving into Maul's mind. And another wonderful episode written by the great Jennifer Corbett, which I was glad to see her name once again. And I just thought it was great how they were sort of, you know, it mixed things up a little bit. And I just remember watching episode 7, and, you know, obviously we hadn't gotten to episode 9 yet, which is, oh my god. But but with episode 7, I was like, oh shit, things are going down. And but yeah, and then we get to see like Maul doing, you know, being Maul, like saying to Devon, the choice is yours. And then when push comes to shove, he's like, no, actually, you're coming with me. Do you like it or not? And then things interfere, and lots of things blowing up, and lightsaber fights, and it was just really exciting.
This is where I think the fact that this show was so serialized really pays off, because, you know, essentially the first 6 episodes, even though they were also jam-packed in the with action and emotional character drama, like, were really kind of at like the starting at the peak, and then there's a little bit of falling action, as you said, in episode 8, which I've come to think of Maul's sewer of self-reflection, quite literally. And then basically the all-out, you know, chaos and emotional gut punches of episodes 9 and 10. So I think that this will play even better once, as you said, we go back and watch the full season, and basically can see this almost as like kind of the kind of start of Act 2 transition into Act 3, where, because obviously at the end of episode 7 and the start of episode 8, Maul is at the lowest point for the character that we've ever seen in this show. And one of the lowest points of his entire life. Obviously, nothing's going to compare to the 12 years he spent on the Lothal Minor, cut in half and losing his mind with spider legs and spider butt. But this is kind of close, because he is truly alone in these moments, and he's reflecting back on the times when he essentially was at his lowest point, because he has talked all throughout these episodes about his grand plan for defeating the Empire and getting his revenge on Darth Sidious, and luring Devon to the dark side, and essentially like fulfilling the dreams he has of power, and essentially what he believes he was promised and owed when he took this devil's deal with Darth Sidious all these years ago. And here he is essentially on the verge of losing all of it. And so naturally it feels important for him to kind of be reflecting on that moment when he made the choice that would ultimately define his life. Again, not that it was much of a choice, because I think Darth Sidious was taking him either way, but it is telling that we actually see the moment where his brother Savage is begging him, "Don't do this, brother. Don't go with this monster." And Maul in that moment, says it's all right. And then obviously he suffers horrifically for it. And it's telling that he starts off in that episode when he first sees the younger version of himself. He's basically like, "I hate you," because he sees that younger self as weak, and he sees that younger self as foolish and someone who failed. And essentially he needed to kill that version of himself in order to become Darth Maul, all-powerful Dark Lord of the Sith. But then by the end of it, he is having sympathy for that younger version of himself and apologizing to him. And it's the closest, I truly believe, we have ever seen Maul come to making possibly a turn, whether to the light side or to make a better choice. But then he has what I thought was one of the most, impactful and resonant lines when he's looking at the reflection of his younger self, and he says, "It's all right. I won't let him do this to anyone else." And that like that feels like a moment when it's like, yes, you have decided to make a better choice, but we know, what is he going to do as soon as he leaves? He is going to go and essentially take someone else's choice away from them and push them to the dark side to serve his ends. And when he says, "I won't let him do this to anyone else," what he means is essentially that, like, I'm going to kill this man, and I'm going to do it using the techniques that he taught me because I don't know anything else. And that's where you really see, like, this is the true tragedy of Maul's character, that he just, like, he can't get out of this toxic cycle of hatred and violence and revenge. And this is the moment where he feels the most relatable, because we've all had our low moments in life when it feels like everything is despairing, and at our best, it hopefully is an opportunity for us to kind of reflect and rise up again. And Maul does rise up, but he's not ultimately a better person for it. And it takes him kind of encountering like an apotheosis of the evil he was trying to reach in Vader to kind of show him still how far he has to go. But it helps for, our dramatic purposes that, Maul loses almost everything that he started with at the beginning of this series. But at the end, he gets the one thing he has been seeking for this entire series. He finally gets Devon to agree to join him. And so it's a victory for the character. But we have to ask ourselves, what did it cost him? What did it truly cost him in the end?
Yeah. Yeah, and so on that note, I want to respond to Master Link in the chat. I think Maul thinks he's thinking for himself.
Yeah.
But I think unfortunately he is still caught up in the programming
Yeah.
that he learned from Sidious. So like, and that is the tragedy of the character. Um, it's like we so often say, like a lot of these characters in Star Wars really need a therapist bad. Um, that's the real that's the crux of Sidious's overarching evil plan is he's making it very difficult to for people to have affordable health care.
Yeah.
And so they never get to get the therapy they need. Um,
Your
yeah.
premiums will be sky high, and you will get no supplemental coverage.
Um, yeah, it's I just loved like and I'm gonna separate out like the thrill of seeing some of those like flashback moments from the actual emotional reaction I had of Maul going through that. So we'll talk about the former in a second. But like it was just great because like Maul is a character who I love so much because it seems like he's in this never-ending cycle of suffering. So I always feel really bad for him, even as he's doing these horrific things, because he's someone who he can't break the cycle. I think he comes close to having like, you know, to once again, be on the therapy theme. Like he comes really close to having a breakthrough, on numerous occasions, and none more so, I think, than in this, in that episode. Uh, and the to go from "I hate you" to "it's all right," it's like, and those are the wide that's the wide spectrum of like the torment that Maul goes through. He hates himself, um, but I think deep down he wishes that he had made different choices in life. Um, but to quote Knives Out, in for a penny, in for a pound. Like he's got to keep going down this path. But he doesn't realize the full extent to which he's sort of, you know, to steal from Force Center, that he's cursed, and like if he could just have a bit more self-awareness, I think like there's a chance that the character could have come out the other side better for it, because I think he is actually one of the most, you know, um, granted he's not human, but like I think he is one of the most human characters in all of Star Wars, just because of the pain that he's endured, and the only thing he knows how to do is to then inflict that pain back onto others. Um, and it just sucks because he is very like, because we all go through like some of the, we don't take it to the lengths that he takes it. But like I think we all know what it's like to, suffer from, our own various traumas, and feel like there's no way out of that, and you try to claw your way out, but it's hard, and sometimes you continue to make bad choices, and so I think that's why Maul is such a great character. And and I just really loved the perspective of like getting all these moments from his, POV, and like when he sees Obi-Wan leaping at him to cut him in half, like from his perspective, Obi-Wan is the villain there, and he's this force of nature that took everything from him, and so I just thought that was really fascinating to get that viewpoint on things. And so yeah, that's why I when I called into Force Center, about a week or so ago, I said like, no, I hear the arguments like don't buy into Maul's stuff, but when you're dealing with the fictional story and a character that you love, it's okay to buy into it a little bit, because it feels good to like root for someone who's suffered so much, even if they're doing despicable things. That's the like I think a lot of people don't understand that like there's supposed to be a disconnect between fiction and reality. And so when you're watching a story like this, I think it's okay to like want Maul to win, and to want him to sort of come out on top, because I think there's so much there to empathize with. But then to also look at what he does to other people and see the damage that is wrought. And yeah, and so to just see him breaking down like that, I was, my heart goes out to him, even though he's a bad man.
Yes. Yeah, and keeping on with the whole like therapy theme and how like it can help you grow and change. Like one of the things that therapists are supposed to do, and as part of their way to help you work through trauma, and is essentially help you recognize the problem, which I think Maul kind of does recognize the problem, so he's halfway there. But then they also are supposed to give you tools, essentially, strategies that you can use to essentially put that self-realization into self-actualization, basically, to change for the better, and one of Maul's tragedies is the fact that he never had a person who could show him how to do that. He essentially, like, in terms of parental figures, like, he had his biological mother Talzin, who essentially it's just explained in the Clone Wars series, like, effectively gave him away. She was kind of tricked, but she gave him away to Sidious because he promised her greater power. And then Sidious obviously became a terrible father figure to Maul, and the worst that you could have. And then even when Maul gets his mother back, he essentially, what does she do? She essentially kind of enables his own worst impulses. She kind of is like, yes, I will heal your mind and I will heal your body, and I will do it so you can go get the revenge on the people who wronged us. Which is why one of my very, 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 very few nitpicks with these episodes that I just thought were outstanding was I kind of wish we had gotten to see a little bit of Mother Talzin in that kind of flash like sequence in the sewer, whether it was her, being present when he when Maul is taken by Sidious, or the moment of her death at General Grievous's hands and Sidious's hands that is depicted in The Son of Dathomir. I understand why they didn't do it, because frankly, that part of the, it's in a comic, it never got animated, and they really just chose to focus more on Maul's bond with his brother Savage, which we did see in the Clone Wars, and Maul just got a terrible reminder of when the Night Brother Scorn essentially sacrificed his life to help save Maul from the Inquisitors. But regardless, I think Mother Talzin's influence is still present there, and it was a missed opportunity. It was a missed opportunity, one of many for Maul to, grow and change. And ironically, like, the one time he actually gets that that kind of figure offering him guidance and the tools he needs to find his way towards peace is Obi-Wan Kenobi at the end of his life, when after Obi-Wan has cut him down, and then he holds him in his arms and basically gives him the comforting words that he needs in that moment. But even in that moment, when Maul asks him, is it true? Is he the chosen one? And Obi-Wan says, yes, he is, referring to Luke. And Maul's final words are, he will avenge us. And it just shows that this poor guy never truly had a chance. But to his credit, one of the things that ultimately does define Maul, even if it's kind of misguided, is his resilience. Obviously, you need to be resilient in order to survive being cut in half by Obi-Wan. And I do love, as you said, that we see that moment from Maul's perspective, and the fact that he's probably that's probably one of the things that made him lose his mind, is putting that moment again and again and again and again over his head, the moment when Obi-Wan leapt at him and cut his legs off. But Maul survived that. And then he survived, what Sidious did to him later, and now he's surviving this. So, like, he is ultimately, truly, like, has the physical and mental will to enact to make that change. It's just that he ultimately, because he doesn't have the the tools or the perspective needed to turn himself in the right direction, the only way he can go is further down into the dark. And of course, that's a terribly lonely place to be. But that is one of the reasons why Maul is so desperate to have somebody there with him, whether it was his brother Savage or now Devon, because he has essentially, he will be we will now get to see Maul as the mentor figure, because even though he had that connection with Savage, he was much more like you're my apprentice, but it's more just like I'm on top and you are on the bottom and you will do what I say. And in this case, he's actually going to have an opportunity to essentially mold her perspective, this young person who has just gone through a terrible trauma. And now she is without the mentor figures that she needs to process it and cope with it. Who does she have? She has Maul. And it will be a testament to Devon's strength of will if she can resist it. But based on what we see at the end of the episode, I think that she is going to join him in that black pit for a while before she sees the light again.
Oh, this is a bright, cheerful story.
Yes, it is. What would you? This is why we were like, Star Wars. This is the first time, arguably, that they've really done a show centered on a dark side character, the acolyte, give or take. Just because, and this is one of the things we were worried about, was like, how are we going to do a show about a dark side character when he can't grow and change? And the nature of the dark side is it's defined by, again, fear, pain, loss, anger, aggression. And they've managed to do it pretty spectacularly by showing that Maul is kind of, capable of being better, but is ultimately trapped by those emotions. And Devon started as a very, good and understandable person with some understandable frustrations, but through a traumatic event, she is essentially, tipping towards darkness. And ultimately, Star Wars is a morality tale. And I think that this will be a fascinating opportunity to truly watch, this young woman, what it truly involves, what the nature of falling to the dark side. Because we saw Anakin's fall throughout the prequels, and I push back on anyone that says whose fall was too quick, because his fall spans 3 movies. I understand why people think the actual moment when he turns is a little sudden, but again, he's lying to himself there, and then he just falls. Because again, for him, it's the only way out is through. The only way to get through this horrible moment is to push deeper into the darkness. And Devon had a moment where she essentially could say, I've lost my master. This is a terrible thing that's happened. I'm so angry. I'm so hurt. I'm so lost. But I could honor his teachings to me. But she's understandably heartbroken and angry that this person she loved was taking for her. So instead, finally, when Maul, and I love this choice in the final episode, because Maul has been pushing her, and as you said, he took away her choice, in episode 7. But in that moment when Devon is on her back and the 11th brother is advancing on her, Maul, he doesn't throw Devon his lightsaber. He holds it up and offers it to her. And in that moment, she takes it. She walks through the door. And she is the one who is, being angry and aggressive and ultimately wounds the 11th brother and drives him back. And then wants to basically go take on Vader before Maul's like, yeah, you're not ready for that. But then at the end, what does she say? All right, I'm ready. And does she know what she's ready for? Probably not. But she will be essentially entering the heart of darkness.
Yeah, and to what degree remains to be seen, because I think something important to keep in mind is she is traumatized in this moment and is understandably very angry. It'll be interesting to see where she is when we pick up with her, um, and I think that'll depend on does next season pick up immediately? Is there a little bit of a time jump? And it'll be interesting to see how far down the road she gets with him into like completely buying in, or if there will be part of her that's still pulling back a bit. And so yeah, like I ended with so many questions at at, at the end, and I'm like, I'm just gonna have to hold, like, be happy with where we're at because it's gonna be a while before we get any answers. Um, but yeah, I I hesitate to say this because like I don't like people using other Star Wars content as a, you know, sort of um to beat back on like other Star Wars, but I do want to say like I think perhaps one of the reasons why I wasn't as pulled in by the Acolyte as I know some people were is that um I didn't I it's something that this show does really brilliantly, which is why I think that this is the sort of, be seduced by the dark side show that, really clicked for me, is because I felt like I was being seduced along with Devon
Yeah.
watching. And I didn't necessarily feel like when with the Acolyte, I kind of felt like, when the stranger was making his pitch, I was kind of like, yeah, you're full of shit, and you're making arguments that don't really ring uh true, though I understand why they would, to perhaps um to
To
um
OSHA. To
the
OSHA.
OSHA. Yeah, I was about to say May, but OSHA. But I think that what's so amazing about this show is that, yeah, like Maul's a bad person and he is a villain, but also like so many of the things that he says, I'm like, "Oh, he's not wrong." and I just think that the sort of seduction was done so well in this show, and to make Maul like, he's still the person that you shouldn't really listen to, but his arguments are very compelling. Um, and I think it's because we know Maul so well. We're in his head, that I just think it works so brilliantly. So, and it's very interesting because this is actually the type of show that I kind of thought when they were first talking about the Acolyte coming out, that show ended up actually being, even though it's a very dark show, it was sort of like aesthetically a bit lighter than I imagined it was going to be. And I thought it would be a bit more like this, like really delving into the sort of heart of darkness. And I want to make clear again, that's nothing against that show, but I think that that Maul Shadow Lord just sort of clicked for me in terms of the the show that successfully seduces me to the dark side, along with the character of Devon. And um and I just think that that's such fascinating material to be mined in a Star Wars story. um and which is not to say that like it's right. Maul's not right. He's giving very, he's giving advice that's very appealing, but it's still bad advice.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's the kind of show that I've just been itching for, and especially to have Maul at the center of it, who is a character who has sort of, you know um haunted my nightmares all the way back to 1999. And yeah, so this show, I think, was just really successful in that way um of just sort of digging its way into the recesses of my brain, and making me question things. even though I know I shouldn't. Uh, but yeah, I just thought it was that aspect of it was absolutely brilliant. I do like. I'm scared for Devon. You know, moving forward from here, I actually hope that by story's end, she finds a way out of Maul's clutches that doesn't involve him. Either her descending completely into darkness without coming back out of it, and if she does, I hope that doesn't mean that then you know Maul will kill her. I'd like to see her find some kind of peace at the end of all this. And I know the other day on Force Center, somebody speculated that maybe she's the reason Maul gets stranded on Malachor. I think that's a Kira
I agree.
the thing, but still, I wouldn't be displeased either. But yeah, and I think that's also something that makes the show really successful, is that as fascinating character as Maul is, he was not the only extremely fascinating character in this show, and right at the top of that list is Devon. I just thought what a great character they developed here, and I'm so like I said, I'm so worried for her, and I'm invested in where she goes from here.
As am I. And I'm with you that this has been a really effective way of looking at the seductive power of the dark side, because that is obviously one of the first things that we ever learned about the dark side, is its seductive power. When Obi-Wan tells Luke in his hut on Tatooine, Vader was seduced by the dark side of the Force. And I think that, like, when, comparing it to the Acolyte, which again, we don't want to go too deep on that front, but because I do love a lot about the Acolyte show, but I will just say the caveats I will always throw at the Acolyte are: one, its story was unfinished. I do think it probably would sit better for me if it had gotten additional seasons to really layer in the backstory of the Chimera / the Stranger and the implications of Osha's choice. Because one of the reasons that this show is so effective is because we have so much history with Maul. Like, we have seen essentially, we have seen a large portion of his life, and we know what makes him tick, and we know why he is making the choices that he made, and we wish he would make better ones, but we ultimately know that he cannot. And the character of the character of Osha and the Acolyte, ultimately what breaks her in that show is the revelation that this bond that she had with her master, who she loved, Soul, and the connection that she had with her family on Brendock and her sister May, it was all ultimately based on a lie. And essentially the Stranger is able to use that to turn her on, basically by doubling down on his philosophy of whataboutism, see, the Jedi are just as bad as the Sith, which is one of the things that I struggled with on that show. It was I feel like the show's leaning a little bit too much into the Jedi flaws when they're talking about the fact that yes, the Sith have some answers, but ultimately those answers are empty. And I think that what is so fascinating about this is that the character of Devon, Maul, does not really lie to her. He's being very honest with what he can offer her, at least in terms of what it is that she wants, and yes, he's playing on her fears and insecurities, but I always think back to that incredible scene in episode 3 when he is essentially trying to seduce her to the dark side by talking about their commonality and pointing out essentially the destiny that she had, that she has been robbed of because of factors that were beyond her control, and the understandable frustration she feels with that. And then he just pushes on that wound and pushes, and to the point when he's spitting at her, "Your life is in ruin." And then she screams with rage and launches herself at him. And then she pulls back because she remembers Daki's teachings. And Daki is obviously her bond with him is incredibly strong, but his perspective, she began to push back on it, just because, not only because Maul's influence that Daki calls out, but just because Daki's perspective in this times, it probably didn't evolve fast enough. I think back to there's the moment that I actually, when I called into Force Center after episodes 7 and 8, and I was talking about the fact that there's that moment when after Devon escapes, but Riley's captured and she makes her way back to Lawson and Daki says, like, I fear that our president has made things worse. Perhaps if we were to extricate ourselves from the situation, the Empire would find leniency with the Lawsons. And Devon just looks at them like, what are you talking about? What have you seen from the Empire that makes us think that that's what they would do? And and to Daki's credit, he's like, you know what, you're right. We got to go save Riley.
And I actually think that that's also, an important aspect is that Daki is not without his flaws.
Yes.
And I think that makes him an interesting character too. I think that his sort of perspective and his sense of morality are all very good things and speak in his favor. But I think I'm gonna say it. Maul has a point that like Daki is not really like adjusting to the situation that they're in. And like the fact that I think Daki, when he says that, like, I had a similar moment of like, what are you talking about? Like the Empire, like that is a moment of Daki, I think, being a bit naive, and so. And so that's the thing, like Maul wouldn't be able to get into Devon's head if it wasn't for her existing frustrations with her master and sort of the fact that I think that she thinks he's being too rigid at times. And like their lives are not what they were. And as much as like I greatly admire Daki sticking by his principles. I think it's what makes him, someone who's very admirable. I don't look at him. I don't love the tendency for audiences to like look at people who like stand by their morality and their sort of principles and say that character is weak. I actually think it takes enormous strength to do that. But it's also true that you have to make decisions based on the situation that you're in. And I don't think like the answer is to go all the way to like what Maul is saying of, embrace your anger and all that stuff. I think that is definitely bad advice. But I do think Daki is difficult of being a bit too rigid and not like that is a situation where you're not going to like extricate yourself from this situation and hope things go better. No, you're actually a little bit to blame for the, for basically getting them caught up in this. As a Jedi, you should then, it's sort of your duty to get them out of it. And so yeah, I totally understood like Devon's point of view in that instance. It's like we got to help him.
Yes.
And so yeah, but I think that makes it so interesting because it would like if Daki was right all the time, then it wouldn't make what Maul's offering as fascinating. And it gives you a way of of just seeing why she finds him appealing. And I'm just I think to that moment where he takes down the walker and she's like, whoa.
Yeah.
And Daki is looking at her like, uh-oh.
Yeah, I love that moment too because it is definitely a moment when Daki is sensing like, oh no, the bad boy has his hooks in my girth. I think this is I got to squash this. But in particular, I love the fact because Daki has been such a phenomenal character, partially because of his flaws, but also, as you said, because of the strength of his principles. Because his principles are incredibly admirable. Like he has, I think, been one of the Jedi who is most truly committed to living his principles that we've seen. And I think that he has moments where, yes, his perspective is revealed to be flawed and perhaps not up to date with the times, but ultimately he still has a lot of valuable insights to teach Devon. And that's one of the things that's so effective about these final episodes, is that we essentially truly get the angel and the devil moment on Devon's shoulder, like sometimes quite literally, and which one will she choose? And the talking about, for instance, like when they're talking about how to fight Vader, and Daki is offering the light side perspective of like, yeah, if we, yes, he's very dangerous and very powerful, but if we stay together and if we defend one another, we can survive this. And Maul's perspective of, no, like, you can't do that with this guy. He knows Jedi. He knows your moves. Aggression is the only way to beat him. And Devon, like, to her credit, like, she's absorbing all of this. Like, one of the things, again, we bring up the Acolyte just because it's another case where we've seen a character essentially fall to the dark side in this way. But in that case, the character of Osha, her relationship with her master soul effectively gets completely shattered, to the point that when the truth comes out, she has essentially disowned his entire philosophy. And in fact, as she's choking him to death, she just says, "Stop talking." And it's because she feels he has betrayed her. Devon never gets there with Daki. I wondered if she might. I wonder, like, this show actually did a remarkable job of lulling me into a false sense of security, where, like, because as soon as Daki showed up in the trailer, I'm like, that dude's gonna die. And we actually got to the point of, in my episode 8, we're like, you know what? There actually could be an interesting story where maybe Daki survives, and Devon actually just makes the active choice that, no, I have decided that Maul's philosophy is better suited for these times, and I'm going to go with him. But then, of course, yes, the show was lulling us into a false sense of security, and it's like, Daki beat the over on how many episodes, the 3.5 episode over under on when he was going to die. But eventually, he's going to meet Vader. And so, but that ultimately proves to be a big catalyst for Devon, because her love for her master is so sincere that even as Maul's philosophy has been appealing to her, she has essentially resisted it because of Daki's teachings. And then when Daki himself is taken away from her, the fact that Maul has been effective in getting his message through to her, it doesn't seem like such a radical leap for her to essentially fall back into Maul's waiting arms, essentially, because he has established himself as a mentor figure for her. And as Daki says, I believe it's in episode 9, it's like, Maul couldn't send you this dream, these visions, if there wasn't some kind of bond between your two. And even though Devon has been resisting Maul openly, like, her perspective, his influence has become more prominent on her. Like, for instance, I also mentioned this when I called in the Force Center. I love the moment in episode 8 when she has to go steal the speeder, and she encounters the thuggish aliens. And at first she does the Jedi thing of basically being like, I'm going to need to borrow this. But then when the aliens are like, hell no, you're not. We're going to beat you to a pulp. And they put her hands on her, and then she sighs, and then she almost smiles, and she's like, yeah. And then we see that she's like, all right, I tried to do this the Jedi way, but you're not going to have that. So you've given me permission to totally kick your ass. And more than that, I'm going to enjoy it a little bit. And that's a very Maul kind of thing to do.
And you know what? And as an audience member, I was like, yeah.
Yep.
So yeah. Oh God. Yeah, it's yeah, like you said, just the way they sort of, they layered this in throughout the entire show of, yeah, even as, like, we see Devon, like, pushing back on Maul in several episodes, still his messages getting through, and I mean, the foundation is being laid for that moment. And Ugh. Yeah, and yeah, Daki made it like so much further than any, but like he makes it practically to the end of the final episode almost.
So close. So close. He
And
stumbled right there at the finish line. And but to be fair, Maul kind of pushed him into it, literally.
yeah, which can I just say that like I know like I was gonna save most of that stuff until later, but we've been talking about it quite a bit anyway. Like that moment when he pushes Daki forward and then limps off, I was like, I know it's like methodical and all this stuff, but like what I actually said out loud, "You fucking coward."
Yeah. I think you mentioned that you referenced the Elizabeth Swan moment from Pirates of the
Yeah.
Caribbean
Oh,
when she sees Jack Sparrow fleeing the battle. Oh, and of course Jack comes back, but Maul,
yeah,
not so much. That is a moment that is designed to frustrate us because we had talked about the fact that Daki had been saying, like, essentially, if we work together, if we defend one another, we can, maybe not defeat Vader. I don't think he's beatable at this stage for them, but we could survive. We could all escape, and that is ultimately our goal. And the episode takes the time to show us that, where they actually like they're doing pretty damn well again, considering that Vader is the chosen one and then an unstoppable killing machine at this point. But that's all to set up the fact that like even though the path of the light side is harder, like that's where Yoda's message in The Empire Strikes Back to Luke when he asks, "Is the dark side stronger?" and he says, "No, no, no, quicker, easier, more seductive." And one of the things that what is the ultimate driver of the dark side? It is fear. And there is a moment when maybe like where Maul like could have continued to fight with Daki, but in that moment, Vader has just injured his leg again, which that poor leg. That guy is.
well, I really thought by the time we get to the end of the season, like his whole lower body is like so wrecked that maybe this is why he has
Yeah.
different legs in Solo. Maybe he just needs like a whole new setup.
He
And
needs he needs an upgrade, yeah. But it definitely was. It's like, oh, it had to be there. It had to be the hip he's getting injured in like for the past 6 episodes. But it's telling that that is the moment where Maul like essentially has to take a beat because he recognizes that like yes, this philosophy that like Daki, we're working together and we're holding off Vader, but there's risk in that. Like if I go back and I join the fight against Vader again when I'm injured, there is a very real chance I could die. And essentially, but if I essentially give in to my fear and anger and I sacrifice Daki here to ensure that I live, then not only will I survive, but I will essentially have removed this obstacle to Devon's seduction that has been there for the entire time I've known her. And so, yes, in that moment, he takes the coward's way out. He takes the quick and easy path. And there's that heartbreaking moment when Daki, who's gone into this with his eyes wide open, he never trusted Maul, not once. But he made the decision to work with him because it was their only chance at survival. And that moment when he realizes that, yes, what he always feared would come to pass, that moment Maul has betrayed them and he has done so at the worst possible time. And now Daki is completely alone and he's looking around and there's Devon isn't there, Maul isn't there, and it's just him and Vader. And to his credit, he stands up and gives the fight. But in that moment, he knows that he is doomed. And
I mean, like all credit to Daki, he lands a hit on Vader, which is really quite impressive.
yeah,
And like, there's no like, if you got to go down, you know, and all out brawl with Darth Vader is a pretty
Yeah.
is a pretty impressive way to go. But yeah, God. Um, I want to go back a little bit before we get to, because we could just like continue to talk just about this whole final section of the episodes. But I want to go back a bit earlier and uh, let's see what I want to highlight. Um, ooh, let me I see, because there's so many different places. We talked about, Maul sort of walked through, his past. Oh, I did want to comment on that. Um, I also clocked that they didn't show Mother Talzin, and specifically, I was waiting for them to do flashbacks of, her final death
Yeah.
from the son of Dathomir, and I was actually quite surprised that they didn't do it, but I feel like if they were gonna, like do that in some way, this was the perfect way for them to do it. So I have to feel like there's purpose in that we didn't get that. I don't know if that means that they're gonna like save another episode for sort of dealing, like showing us some of that and dealing with like Maul's sort of, you know, talking about the death of his mother, or dare I hope for a more expansive telling of Sons of Dathomir at some point in the future. I still think, regardless, it would have been nice to see it, because I think like it would very much have been on his mind, um, but I'm sure they had their reasons. But I was a little disappointed. I'm like, oh, this was such a perfect moment to like to show us some of that, and so I don't know. We'll have to see what the future holds.
Yeah, hope springs eternal because, like, I have, for instance, I have a feeling that at some point during their training together, Maul will take Devon to Dathomir, and that would be like a perfect opportunity for them to reflect on like Mother Talzin and have some like witchy Force visions of her, perhaps. Or, as you said, we could just maybe get like an animated movie of the Son of Dathomir, and then and then maybe we could have the best of both worlds. But yeah, I like I said, it was telling to me just because of her absence and because of the fact that they have referenced the fact that Maul is thinking about the loss of his mother as well, but it's also there's a purpose to everything behind what these storytellers are doing. So as you said, if there's a chance that they're saving it for a more impactful reveal down the line, then I'm in support of that. It's just I was a little bummed that we didn't get to see Mother Talzin.
Yeah. And so going back a bit, I do want to like talk about like when Maul brings it brings Devon and Riley like underground, and then the mayhem that ensues after that. And this isn't a great moment to just again recognize the brilliance, and then we'll cry a little later on about Spybot, and
Oh no.
and like love when he sees Riley. Doesn't he say something like, good luck staying alive? Or
Yeah, no, he first he greets Maul. It's like Maul was worried, and then he sees Devon and he spits Jedi, and then he sees Riley and he starts poking him with his little pen. He's like, "Oh, lousy boyo, good luck staying alive," which again is just such cool. Like the Spybot is like, oh my god, I might actually cry. We talk about his death later.
well, okay, but then also that reminds me of another moment when a couple episodes later, when they're all together, working together as a team, and Vario starts saying something to Brander, and Brander's like, Vario, to be completely honest, I'm shocked you're still alive.
That was so great.
But yeah, I what was what was so interesting to me, and we've just been talking about how Maul has been sort of laying the groundwork for his seduction of Devon throughout the entire season, and it really pays off when at the end of the last episode, he basically leaves it up to her to take the saber. But in this earlier episode, we see something quite different where he's run short on patience, and he tries basically to force her to come along. And I think it's his one, it's an example of a misstep where sometimes Mauls lets his anger and impatience get the better of him, and he really did some damage to his case in this moment where he is like, I am tired of this, you are coming with me. And it's
Yeah.
that's not gonna work. And but then this is also a moment of I think even with that, Devon still gives in to her anger a bit. And when the Empire shows up, and uh, and instead of doing what she should be doing, which is protecting Riley, she gives in to um, wanting to embrace her anger and hurt the Empire, which is it's almost like we've seen this theme somewhere
Mm-hmm.
before. Um, very very Finn in the Last Jedi.
Yeah.
Um, you know, she you know I don't know if I go far just to uh, reference protecting what she loves, because she doesn't really know Riley yet, but it is her,
Yeah.
sort of, she was tasked with keeping him safe. And so I thought that was very interesting, and the fact that she seems to realize that was a mistake, and she even apologizes to him later on once they're safe. And uh which is why the show is so brilliant about psyching me out of sort of jerking me this way and that way with Devon, and making me think that she was totally not falling for Maul's shit. And and then sometimes it's like, oh no, she's listening to him, and then other times I'm like, no, she's got her head on her shoulders in the right way. And then so it really did keep you in suspense, because I'll be completely honest, at a certain point, I was watching these episodes and I was like, what if the story of the show is not actually that she falls to the dark side? Um, and actually she holds on to the light, and both her and Daki carry on into next season as master and apprentice. And of course that didn't end up happening, but the show actually had me convinced that it could go that way. And I just
Yeah.
think that that was really sort of ingenious how they kept you guessing like that.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that makes Devon such a fascinating and worthy protagonist for because I do believe that, especially going forward, she will essentially be the co-protagonist of this series
Yep.
along with Maul, and the one who has the potential to undergo a more complete character arc. But in particular, like that moment you cited in episode 7, where we get to see the fact that yes, Devon is saying all the right things to Riley, basically like, we can't trust this guy. Like, you're right. We need to escape as soon as we get the chance. And Maul offering the illusion of choice. Like, once we reach my base, you are free to do whatever you like. And it's a very, for us, understandable and relatable moment that when they get there and Maul's like, maybe I've done enough. Maybe I've done enough to convince her to come with me. And then it's like, nope, she's running again. And Maul, he loses his cool for a bit. He's like, after everything I've done for you, like you're making me do this now when the Empire's coming. Open your eyes. And she, obviously, that is not the right approach. That is, she's gonna double down on her Jedi teachings. But he has been effective in shaping her perspective, because that moment when the Empire arrives and she has the choice to either protect Riley and flee or stand with Maul and fight the Empire, and she chooses in that moment to go and attack the stormtroopers so that they can, try to hold them off. You understand, like, it's an understandable decision in the moment, but of course it directly leads to Riley getting captured. And that kind of helps recenter her for a little bit, that she's like, that was a mistake. I gave into my anger and aggression. I'm going to go back to my master. I'm going to leave Maul to his potential fate here. But then almost immediately she again runs into that scene with her Daki, where Daki kind of is talking about maybe we need to remove ourselves from a situation, and she's like, no, we need to go help him do the right thing. And yes, that is the Jedi way to help and to intervene and protect the innocent, but it's also her choosing essentially the more active, aggressive path, because she does want to fight the Empire. She's made that very clear. And that's why, like, when we see, and one of the ways that Maul also ultimately kind of starts to win her back in a certain way, is that we see that, like, he when he does encounter her again, he takes a little bit more of a soft approach. Like, he isn't he's basically presenting this as an alliance, an opportunity to escape. And yes, while she's awed by his power, she ultimately starts to see him, like, doing in a weird way certain, like, selfless things, like the fact that he's letting, like, other people go across the chasm first, and including her and Daki and Hermat and the other and Riley and Lawson, and then as he's paying a cost for it, as his allies are starting to fall, there's that moment in, I believe, episode 9, right before the Vader reveal, when she looks back at him and is like, I'm sorry that you lost your friends. Like, she's empathizing with him in this moment. And Maul essentially kind of just takes that, but then he recognizes that, like, we're getting close here. Like, and obviously Vader showing up is a massive wrench in the situation, but Maul, when he's offering that perspective to her in the after Daki is kind of tried to shut down Maul's philosophy, and Maul sits down on the rock and says essentially, Devon, listen, I implore you, the reason I know, like, what all of this is because I was trained by the most powerful Sith Lord of all, Darth Sidious. You need to evolve, you need to adapt. And Devon has been evolving and she has been adapting, and Maul's starting to sound much more reasonable here. And of course, when she gets she has the traumatic moment where she witnesses her master's death and is obviously traumatized by it. But again, it's the classic mentor thing. Like, earlier in their dynamic, Maul was essentially doing what you should do in the when you're teaching or mentoring somebody. You essentially show them the door, but you allow them to walk through it. He did that quite literally when he had her in the tank prison in the beginning. He's basically like, you can leave anytime you like, and then he kind of gets frustrated, and he has the moment where he's like, I showed you the door, walk through it already, come on. But then in the classic 3-beat structure in the final episode, when again, when Devon is being menaced by the 11th brother, and Maul basically is like offers up his lightsaber, and Devon finally takes it. And in the sense, what she's doing there is she is taking his hand, much as like Rey and the dynamic with Rey and Ben in the sequel trilogy. Like, I did want to take your hand, Ben's hand, but in this case, it's I'm gonna take your hand, and then we're gonna descend into hell together.
I thought it was really disconcerting, and it was a bad sign when after she's reunited with Daki, and first she dodges his questions about, like, were you alone? But then later on, when he asks her about it again, and she says, he saved us, and omits the part where he actually tried to abduct her and take her against her will. The fact that she doesn't mention that, I was like, oh no, that's a bad sign. And also, I want to also address something in that scene where, when they're being pursued by Vader, and you mentioned it when the Maul sits down and is counseling her, to adapt and use her, aggression to achieve her potential. In that same scene, he also mentions that, my master was Darth Sidious, the greatest, the Sith Lord of all time, and who made himself, who purged the Jedi and made himself the Emperor. And I was like, finally,
Yes.
somebody actually just came out with the crucial information and said it.
Yeah. Wait, it's like, guys, like Palpatine, it's always been a kind of a joke that like nobody realizes that Sidious and Palpatine are the same person. It's like, but now he's walking around with his evil black hood up all the time. It's like, put two and two together, guys.
It's like it's just a meme where like every like show that has like things that people don't know, and it's like you're always like, guys, sit down and have a conversation. And this is a perfect example of that. Like, it's just like, please, for the love of God, it's like, if only he had been so talkative about Sidious with Ahsoka.
Yeah.
She definitely would have delivered that piece of information.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
I mean, he was obviously holding it until she agreed to join him. But yes, like so much pain could have been avoided if Maul was like, I know Darth Sidious's true name. It's Sheev Palpatine.
oh God! But it was just one of those moments where I was like, yes, finally. But also, you mentioned about the fact that there's this whole episode where you know uh, where our characters are working together, and Maul is like actually letting people like escape before him, and like it lulls you into this false sense of security, and better as a viewer, but you can't help but be like, yay team. And like that whole sequence with the toxic waste swamp, whatever, and with the fight against the Inquisitors and all that, like that is just fucking insane. This is part of why I wish that the episodes had dropped one a week as opposed to two a week, because I really feel like virtually all of these episodes were full meals onto themselves, and that's especially true of episode 9, where it's like we've got one of the most incredible action sequences in all of Star Wars, honestly, I think. And we've got people working together that like we wouldn't think would work together, and like people, and yeah, Maul loses pretty much his whole crew, but they but the way they go out is each one of them very memorable. I'm just thinking of
the other Night Brother, Icarus.
yeah, Icarus, who just like he knows he's doomed and just takes a bunch of stormtroopers with him down into the acid. And I was like, that's being a boss.
Yeah.
And then yes, poor Spybot.
Oh my God.
Just it's like you don't do this to your comic relief. It's that's why I reference Spybot's a leaf on the wind. I said that on Force Center because like it's like no, you don't you don't do that. And I was legitimately shocked.
I was too. The show killed the dog. It killed the dog and the dog coded droid. It's like, and that's like a cardinal sin rule that you do not break. Yeah, I was freaking devastated by Spyro's loss. Like, I mean, like, yes, obviously there's more, like, Daki's death is incredibly emotionally impactful, and Rook Cass, as we'll talk about, but the fat and Brit,
I'm not ready.
Oh yeah, we'll save it all. But Spybot, like, the thing about droids is that, like, there is kind of a little bit of like, no one's ever really gone with the droids, because you can, like, back up their memory and and repair them and stuff. And so, like, even like in that incredibly shocking moment when Marek throws his lightsaber and cuts Spybot in half, I went through basically like the 5 stages of grief in like half a second, where I was like, no, Spybot, how dare you? And then I'm like, but it's okay. But like, they can repair him. It's fine. And then his body sinks into the acid. I was like, no. God, my only hope is that maybe just maybe Maul kept like a backup disc of Spybot's memory somewhere, and they can make Spybot 2.0.
Well, he was
like,
clearly very specially programmed by Maul. I have to believe that. And so, like, I hope we get Spybot 2.0. But even if we do, like, I'm never gonna forget you, Spybot 1.0.
It will never be quite the same, because we will know that we had to go through this horrible and like, Marok, if you weren't on my shit list before, like, for killing Spybot, like, I'm glad that Ahsoka, cut you in half and turned you into green mist, and I can't wait to see you die the first time, because speaking of death, like, I don't think Marok died when Daki pushed him off the bridge. I think we will actually see Marok's death, and it will be much more satisfying when, for instance, he tracks Maul and Devon to Dathomir, and they cut his ass down there, and then, like, oh, we're not done with you yet. You still have to pay for what you did to spoil our poor Spybot.
But just like, but all the freaking action, just like, there's that shot with I don't think I have a picture of it, but there's that shot where, like, Daki senses the Inquisitors coming, and, like, he goes and then Maul and Devon are on either side of him, and he turns on the lightsaber, and it's just this really badass shot where, like, things are going to go down, and then the Inquisitors tear through, like, demons, just and attack, and it's like, and again, like, we've said it before, but, like, the Inquisitors freaking scary in this show, and I just thought it was so effective the way they did them, and, like, the action in this sequence is so kinetic. Everybody's all over the place and moving so fast, which I think is really interesting, because it sort of contrasts when Vader shows up and he's just like, it's like a sledgehammer, just using his raw power and, through sheer force, to, like, bash everybody around. And it's different from this. And, but I just thought it was so amazingly well choreographed, and, just freaking awesome to watch.
This shot that you have up on the screen here, like, this is like instant, like, poster on the wall type shit. Like, just so incredible. It's a moment in the duel, but, like, that specific freeze frame when we have Daki, and of course, we mentioned, the literal, like, devil and angel on Devon's shoulder, with Maul on one side and Daki on the other, as they're fighting against the first brother and the 11th brother. And yeah, like, for me, like, the pinnacle of lightsaber duels in Star Wars animation, it was, and probably still is, Ahsoka's duel with Maul in Clone Wars Season 7, because, of course, they did, like, actual performance capture, and with Ray Park and things like that. But this is, like, there were, like, 5 different duels in the show that I'm just like, well, that's going on the list, and that's going on the list. And this duel with the Inquisitors and the duel with Vader are just not only beautifully animated, but just so raw and visceral. Like, that moment when the Inquisitors come tearing out of the the tunnel, like I think somebody who called into Force Center basically compared them to like the xenomorphs in that scene. I was like, yeah, I see it, because they're just like they're not here to, you know, or a farm or like monologue either. They're like, we want you dead. And this is probably the show that I think has used the Inquisitors most effectively, not only in terms of their cinematic design, but also in terms of re-emphasizing just how dangerous they can be. Because yeah, like it is true that like the Inquisitors in some of the other shows, basically, some of them get they get dispatched a little easily, like including Marek and the 11th Brother when they go up against Ahsoka. But it's also like you have to remember, like characters like Ahsoka and Obi-Wan, like they're not normal Jedi. They're some of the best. So like yes, they can probably handle the Inquisitors a little bit better. For most Jedi, they are formidable opponents indeed. And I think that like that is one of the things that the show.
And also, like, you know, this show has had a very distinctive like horror aesthetic that I think the Inquisitors have fit really well into. I think even with Rebels, where the Inquisitors were introduced, that is a, you know, much more of a show for kids. Even though it's something we adults can enjoy incredibly. I think it's a remarkable show, but it was clearly, you know, made with the intention, at least starting off of this is a show more for a younger audience. Which is why, like, I would love to see the seventh sister in this show. Just timeline wise, it would definitely work. And I just would love for Sarah Michelle Gellar to come back and do that, but get to do like a darker version. And I think that would be really cool. So I have my fingers crossed for that.
Yeah, I would not object to that at all. You know, Sarah Michelle Gellar, like she's married to to Freddie Prinze Jr., who has some Star Wars connections, and so I'm sure they could get her to come back. But yeah, I in particular, you know, the character of Marok and the character of the 11th Brother, or the Crow, as they've come to refer to him as, like, yes, they are the Inquisitors who are probably the most like horror coded of any of them. And the way that they leaned into that in this show, particularly with the Crow, who like Vader basically never speaks in this series, was incredibly effective. And it's also like telling that, like, yeah, in episode 7, for instance, like, you know, yes, Maul was injured, but like this is a case where like this is Darth Maul, and like we think he should be able to handle these two Inquisitors, but they are working him pretty effectively in that scene.
Well, like he's not at 100% because his legs have been damaged.
Which is what
giving him issues, you know, throughout most of the season, and there's 2 of them, you know.
Yes.
So like, yeah. So no, like, I was like, they're just like they're catching him on a bad week, and
yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, but then you know that they give Vader the information of where he's, you know, injured, and he wastes no time in exploiting that.
Yeah, he goes for that leg like 3 times, and Maul has to be like, come on. But yeah, I mean, like, yes, Maul is definitely injured, and that it makes it more effective that like when he comes back later in the seat, he's able to hold his own against both of them, and you know, and because we know Maul is technically more skilled than the Inquisitors, but as you said, he's having a bad day, but it also sets up that great moment in episode 7 where, you know, the Inquisitors finally do have Maul cornered, and it appears that he's getting down on his knees to surrender, and there's like, there is no surrender for you. The Emperor wants you dead. And then Maul, over the real, no, Maul's not surrendering. He spits them. Likewise, and brings down the roof on them, and even though they're masked and you can't see their faces, you can definitely see the moment where, in particular, the Crow is like, "Oh shit!" They turn and run away.
Which I love that that's the de facto move against the dark side force users is let's just bring a bunch of rocks down on them.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to be more effective in certain cases than others, but yeah, it's like the
Yeah,
fact I definitely like, I was also thinking back to Obi-Wan Kenobi when like,
yeah.
like the fact that like Vader's pulling rocks down on Obi-Wan and Obi-Wan's pulling rocks down on Vader. And in this scene, like their Maul tries to pull the roof in on Vader and he pulls the roof in on the Inquisitor. Then it's like, guys, this is kind of a go-to move. I understand, but yeah, I think Cassie makes a really good point in the sense that like yes, in the fact that this show was able to handle horror in such a way because it's able to really kind of lean more into like the stylized aspects of it. Like people have talked a lot about the fact that Marok like is scarier and more effective in this show than he was in Ahsoka, and I think there are a number of reasons for that. One of which he's probably dead and reanimated in Ahsoka, but also like there's the fact that like there's that one scene on Corellia where they're shooting him in broad daylight. He's just not going to look as scary as that when they
And
put
he
Dune in
comes
shadow.
out of the freaking shadows in this
Yeah,
show behind Lawson and puts his arms on his back. Like, yeah, when you can do something animated and it has a very like you get to decide like exactly how something looks and do very stylized representations of that. Like, yeah, I think it's just easier to lean into that, but yeah, just I mean, I haven't been shy about the fact that I think the Inquisitors are much more successful in animation than they are in live action.
yeah.
Um,
Well, I mean, and like I said, I definitely, in terms of how effective and scary they are, I will stand by the fact that, like, for instance, I think the character of Reva is one of the best Star Wars characters, and Moses Ingram's performance is incredible. So but as an Inquisitor, like as they're designed, to be as Jedi hunters, like, yeah, this is one of the best depictions we've seen of them.
yeah. Say as far as Reva goes, I mean, I think she's a unique case because she ultimately, I mean, she is an Inquisitor, but it's like, but she ultimately proves to be something more than that. So, like, I think what we got from her was, a more rich, fleshed out character. Um, Whereas I think with like the other Inquisitors, they just weren't like they just didn't have the aura that they have in animation. So
Yeah.
so yeah.
Although if we're talking about favorite Inquisitors, I will give a shout out to one of my favorite Inquisitors from the video game, Jedi Fallen Order, the second sister, Trilla Siduri, who is an incredible character. Also a very classic, smoking hot evil, evil dark side woman who it's basically like, I could fix you, but why would I want that when I could let you
I
ruin
need
me?
to start playing Star Wars video games. Um, Hi Peter Griffin.
Yeah. Hi, Peter
Nice
Griffin.
to see
Yeah, yeah, and we'll definitely talk about the fact that I think we mentioned it earlier that that Maul basically had to sacrifice everybody to get Devon. But yes, as Cassie says, evil is sexy. It is known, and our constant refrain of "if evil, why hot?" Then, well,
you.
I mean, maybe a little of both.
Um, oh my God, I just saw something a few days ago about I don't remember what the comment was, but somebody was commenting on oh what's her name from Ahsoka? Um
Shin Hati, aka
and I like I said, I don't remember what the comment was, but somebody posted about her, and I just remember in my head my response was, "Baby girl ain't done nothing wrong."
that's my refrain too,
Yeah,
buddy. Like, yeah,
exactly.
I would, yeah, the whole like I was posting it in the Force Center Discord. I'm like, baby girl has never done anything wrong in her entire life, and now I'm really looking forward to Ahsoka season 2.
I want to switch gears and talk about the side of like non-force user characters for a minute. like Brander Lawson, Two Boots, and by extension Riley, but also Rena,
Yeah. Oh,
who is not dead.
yes. Yes. Thank you. Thank you.
And this is exactly why. Now it's interesting because, and I mentioned this on Force Center. At first, I was firmly in the camp that was saying that Brander died in the
Mhm.
finale. I no longer think that, as I've had time to think about it, because there are story beats and elements around him that are not resolved. One of them being the fact that he sees Maul betray Daki,
Yeah.
and it feels like they showed us that for a reason. Like it could have been a misdirect to make us think that he was going to make it out, but I think that that's something that's going to be like a ticking time bomb that will go off at a moment that is highly inconvenient for Maul. And to the arena of it all, she's alive, and if if Brander died, then she's the only person on still on Janet, and it wouldn't really make sense to go back to her story for just her. So I think she's going to rescue Brander. Um, and so yeah, and I maintain what I said. I'm fascinated to find out more about their relationship and their story. Um, I like that like she got a moment to like to let on to Brander that it was a setup and they were walking into a trap. Um, and I'm actually intrigued to like because I'm not quite sure on exactly at what point she was being coerced by the Empire because the Empire doesn't seem to be in the hangar when she first talks to Brander, so it makes me wonder if she actually had a plan to get them all out and then the Empire sprang on her and basically said, yeah, just keep going with that and and we'll set a trap. Um, but either way, I'm glad that she got a moment to let them know. And yeah, like I said, she's not dead because they show her diving behind a crate, and that is all it takes in Star Wars to
Yeah.
survive a gigantic blast. So yeah,
Exactly, which, like shout out to the internet freeze framers who, parsed that out. And I'm like, and basically I'm like, yeah, definitely she's not dead. I do think that like there's because remember we see her in the casino when the Empire comes, like, and she kind of starts fighting them. Like, I think there's maybe a chance she got captured at that point. Because she's very insistent that they like need to leave in the 2 hours. But yeah, I have to admit there was the briefest moment when I was worried that maybe she was diming them out for real, and I'm like, that would totally suck because I really love that character. But the moment she says,
yeah,
"Yeah, the ship's not not in the greatest shape, but it'll get you to Catalor," and then Brander's like, "Yeah, she's been compromised," and I'm like, "Thank you." And then she not only gets to escape and live, she gets the incredible moment when they realize that she warned them, and then what does she do? She grabs the blaster and turns it on the engine, and she gets to kill that fucker Lieutenant Blake too, because I had no protection from the crates. He's dead, and good riddance.
absolutely. Um, so yeah, I understand all the people who are like, no, Brander's dead,
Yeah,
because my first response to that was it felt very much like tech for me, where
yeah,
no, we're not going to actually see a physical body, but it was done for like because people die and there's emotional truth in that, and I was one of those people who was dead set on the entire time with Tech. I was like, he's not still alive. You guys are living
yeah.
in fantasy land. So I'm not one of those people who like jumps into like denial and like, oh, this character can't be dead. And just again, the reason is because there are story elements surrounding Brander that have not yet been resolved. And that is why I'm in the camp of he's still very much alive.
I,
Um,
I I 100% agree. Like, I mean, I will acknowledge that the show did do a good job in terms of offering him a note of like emotional closure with his son. That like if if that was going to be the end of the character, I would have accepted it. I would have, thought that like that was a noble and brave end for his character, giving his life so that his son can save. But as you said, like there are just too many breadcrumbs that show that like his story is not done. And I like one of which being that yes, he sees Maul essentially betray Daki. Two, the characters of Riley and Two Boots are still around, and like I think there's a rich vein to be mined with Riley believing his father is dead, as at the same time that Devon has lost her father figure in Daki. And of course, as you said, the Rena of it all, like, and then there's also just the simple fact that, yeah, like, even in Star Wars, when it comes to deaths, like, Tech, like, for him to have survived, they would have had to explain how he, a guy without force powers, survived falling several hundred, if not thousands of feet. Whereas Brander got shot a couple times, but then he walks into the mist, and the stormtroopers, not to bring this old joke, but the stormtroopers aren't exactly like renowned for their aim, and so I'm like, I can believe that Brander escaped, or at the very least, maybe he got captured. But yeah, I'm like 95% on he survived, and just acknowledging maybe there's the tiniest thing, but like, because I do think emotionally, like there's closure there. But yeah, he's alive. He's not one of the people that we lost here.
Yeah, if he is dead, then I'm fine with that, because I actually think that there is value in showing that there's a cost.
Yeah.
But also like I say, it's just the fact that there are things unresolved, and not in the way that when people die they leave things unresolved, but in terms of telling aspects of this story, I think there are things that still need resolution, and like I said, Rena's not dead. I'm 100% sure of that. So why so we're not going to revisit her. She's not a like big enough character on her own for us to stick around on Janix to follow her story. So it has to be her and Brander. So yeah. Now, if I was dealing in pure delusion about a character surviving, I can tell you exactly who it would be, and unfortunately, I have had to accept it, and that is Rookcast. I just why did they do this to me?
Because they're cruel. That's why.
I mean, she had like so much story potential, but she had her throat torn out by Vader.
Yeah, that is the that was kind of the icing on this particularly dark and bloody Sunday, was the fact that like I'm like, Vader doesn't mess around. Like I don't think there's any way she could survive him. We heard the crunching noise, but then I was like, the whole like, yeah, no body, no death. I suppose there's a minor chance, but then I saw on Instagram that this certain Star Wars influencer called Luke's Outpost talked about how he was at the Maul Shadow Lord finale event, and he spoke with Vanessa Marshall on the red carpet, and she shared with him that the Lucasfilm animation talked to her about, yeah, Rookcast is going to die. How would you like her to die? And she's like, oh, how would I like Rook to die? I want Darth Vader to pull her lungs out of her throat using the Force. And that is what happened. And I was like, oh, so she's not just dead. She's super fucking dead.
Now, I will say I don't care for the fact that she was killed off screen.
Yeah.
Because first of all, it confused me, because at first I thought there was a shot that she was still alive and maybe they'd find her like on the other side of the woods, because I didn't have my headphones in at the time, so I didn't hear the actual crunching sound of
Yeah.
her being killed. And so I wish we had gotten something a bit more on screen, because given that I had so many ideas about where the character should go, I would have. I don't know. Something just doesn't sit right with me about the fact um, that she just dies and we don't get it from her perspective. But also, at the end of the day, as much as I can go on about how much more adult this show has been, at the end of the day, it's still something that has to be, you know, relatively safe for younger viewers to,
Yeah.
to watch, even if it's scaring them. Like, they're not gonna show like blood and guts
Yeah.
and stuff. So I get it, but uh, yeah, it's just like me dealing with the fact that this character is not going to go the places I hoped she was going to go. And so it sat better with me on rewatch, especially once I had my headphones on, so you can actually hear her screaming out, and the crunch of you know of her throat. And but yeah, it hurts, because I really enjoyed her character, and I thought that there was going to be much more to play with the dynamic between her and Maul and with Devon. And so I don't know. I'm in mourning.
Yeah, I hear that. I share your sentiments. This is a case where I have to remind myself of our friends at Force Center, their old, adage that we live by of engage with the story that's being as presented to you, not the story you wish you were being told. Because I was definitely of the camp where I was like, I'm really looking forward to, Rook being an ongoing part of this show, and in particular, I talked about the fact maybe once Devon is like fully on Maul's team, like there can be a little like rivalry, sibling rivalry between Rook and Devon. And I did appreciate we at least got a couple of those moments in like episode 7 and 8, where we saw like Rook essentially reaffirming her loyalty to Maul and trying to give him advice like about, is this girl Devon really worth it? And also, these Mandalorian commandos that I have with me, some of them are kind of, if you keep telling them to leave their money behind, they're eventually going to betray us. And I love the dynamic where they're talking about the allegiance to Devon's allegiance to her master, and Maul's like, allegiances can be severed, and she's like, yes, of course, and he's like, so remember that, and she's like, yes, that's exactly what I'm telling you about these guys. And sidebar, speaking of satisfying deaths, I absolutely love that asshole Mandalorian commando Kebris, who betrayed them and tried to make off with their ship, that he thinks he gets away, and then he has the one moment where he realizes, oh no, this betrayal that I've enacted is going to lead to me immediately dying right now, and I have just enough time to recognize that before I am atomized. That was very satisfying. But Rook,
I think.
no, go
Oh,
ahead.
go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, but the thing about Rook is like when I look at it in the larger context, and I have to recognize that as awesome as Rook cast is, she is a supporting character in this show. And it does make sense to me thematically and narratively that like essentially Maul's obsession and fixation with Devon, essentially he's successful in winning her to the dark side, but in doing so, it essentially costs him all of his other allies in his orbit, including the very last and most loyal of his Mandalorian, commandos, and effectively in that way closing the book on that particular chapter in his life, and essentially opening this new one where he will be, fully the Shadow Lord in control of Crimson Dawn and all of these criminal syndicates. So like when you think about it in that context, it's like, yeah, it makes sense to have Rook essentially die here so that we can have kind of a cleaner break. But I was bummed. I liked her character.
I think And I also think part of my disappointment is also like, and it goes back to I really hope we get Son of Dathomir in animated form at some point, because I think it I always wanted to see Rookcast get more and more story to kind of to sort of, because she's a key part of Son of Dathomir, and it felt like sort of a because it's one thing to say that this comic is canon, but that doesn't always feel like it's the case. But having Rook cast as part of, she showed up in the Clone Wars finale, and she's also been in this show. It's, touches like that felt like it legitimized Son of Dathomir, and same thing with having, Maul talk about the fact that Sidious, killed his mother too. So things like that. And so Rookcast just felt like part of that like recognized the importance of Son of Dathomir into the fabric of Maul's story. And that's why I wanted to see more and more of her. Um, Perhaps it would sting less if we had the beginning of her story in animated form too, so that it would feel more like this was a sort of a full circle, moment in her story of when you align yourself with Maul, this is where it's going to lead. Um, so yeah, so I think it would sting a little less if we eventually get the beginning of her story told. In that form, and not just, yeah, I'm not saying anything bad about comic books. I respect comics. It's not my like favorite form of the media, but like I think like the recast of it all, just the Maul of it all, and it's such an important part of his story that unfortunately does not exist in the animated medium, and I just really wish that it did.
Yeah.
And so I think this ties in with that. That's sort of why I wanted to get more and more of Brooke to kind of miss out to kind of make up for, missing out, in that where she's introduced. And then of course, uh Peter Griffin mentioned this. I have long held on to the theory
Yeah.
that Rook is the armor. I've been a lot less certain of it, and now I'm obviously supremely confident that's not the case. But like, but it was still one of those things that was like,
Yeah.
still could be.
Yeah.
And so to have that sort of extinguished entirely in this moment, um it's done. I just because I had, and I love Vanessa Marshall, and she did a great job voicing Rook. So yeah, it's just one of those things I gotta let go of. But you're right, like story wise, it does make sense because it's Maul losing, all of his followers to get his apprentice, and it is closing the book on, his ties to Mandalore and his uh you know you want to call legitimacy as the ruler of Mandalore.
Hey,
Which,
he's still got the dark saber. It's still hanging
yeah,
out in his cave in Dathomir. But
yeah.
yeah.
So yeah, this is definitely the closing of a chapter, but I was just like, and and this is also like another reason why I wish these episodes had dropped one at a time, because I would have liked to kind of get to sit on this big moment, not just the reveal of Vader, but losing Recast, and as well as Spybot, and
Yeah.
and Maul's other followers, and to also get a week to just sort of bask in the awesomeness of everybody working as a team.
Yeah.
Uh, so yeah, there's a number of reasons why maybe it was felt a bit more like hurtful than that. And I think it would have been hurtful regardless. But you know, I don't know. We all lose characters that we liked, so
Yes, yeah.
it's a way of things.
It is. And yes, if we had a week between episodes 9 and 10, I definitely would have found a way to delude myself into thinking there was a way Spybot could still be alive. Maybe not as much for Cass, because again, that crunching sound was pretty definitive. But yeah, Bush could do, little buddy. See you in down the line. But yes, yeah, this is one of those things that like it's really only an issue when like on the first viewing, because now of course we have the full season and we'll be able to watch it however we like. But yeah, like this is also a case where like the fact that we only had this show for 5 weeks. Oh, bye,
Bye,
Cassie.
Cassie. Thank you so much for tuning in. Yeah,
Yeah.
I would have loved to get to live with the show for 10 weeks instead of 5.
Yeah, I agree. And like, I had that feeling a bit with Andor too, although that was different because Andor, like those episodes were essentially designed that way with the years long gap. But the one episode a week is really, as Cassie says, unfortunately kind of a dying breed. And it's a shame because that's one of the things that drives, conversation and community around these shows. But
But
yeah, I continue to hold out the belief and the hope that eventually Star Wars has to wake up to the idea that they should do animated movies on Disney Plus. And when that happens, the first one that they need to do is Obi-Wan and Satine on the Run. They're holding that story for something, but one of them should be a real Son of Dathomir,
yeah.
animated movie.
Um And then I will, even though I'm much more satisfied with the fact that because we got a novel out of it, I also would not complain if we got Dark Disciple,
Yeah.
because that also would be great to see in animation. Um, but but yeah, so Rook's death though also heralds, the arrival of Vader, which we have, talked about, throughout this stream, but let's really give due to the moment when he arrives, which I freaking love that this is an homage to Splinter of the Mind's Eye.
Yes, so do
Like,
I.
yeah, it's, as a Star Wars geek of old, that's like, and funny thing is, I've never actually read the book, but everybody knows the cover of that book.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just so great, and I'm gonna go ahead and say it. You were right, and I was wrong. I did not think we were gonna get Vader coming into the story at the end of the season. I thought he would be teased at the very end, and then, but a lot of things happened that like I was not expecting. The deaths of aforementioned characters, for
Yeah.
example. But yeah, when as soon as they said, uh, inform him they're on his way, and I was like, oh shit, it's Vader.
Yeah.
He's here. And yeah, you were right. You called it. You said that the season would end with Vader showing up, and yeah, I when he came in, I was like just chills, absolute chills, and yeah, and he just completely dominated uh this final episode and was terrifying and just amazing. And I do want to say, like, I'll let you say your thoughts on like his entrance, but something that I haven't like said yet is I sort of love that this whole final episode, even though there's quite a bit of fog, it takes place like in the bright daylight,
Yeah.
which, for a show called Maul Shadow Lord, and for a character who wanted to remain in the shadows, the fact that Maul is forced out into the light against an opponent who is far stronger than he is, and he is forced to basically run for his life, I just thought was really sort of visually such an interesting way to go. And yeah, and just totally awesome.
Yeah, I agree. Like I mentioned, for instance, earlier that like Marek doesn't look as scary in the light. Not true of Vader. Vader is scary no matter where he shows up, especially
Yeah.
in this show. And yeah, I also love the fact the reminder is like Janix is actually a jungle planet, and the city's built into the crater. You know, with the heart, kind of the whole heart of darkness, like apocalypse now kind of vibe. I thought that was a nice touch. And yes, the splinter of the mind's eye illusion is it was great. The book itself is okay. It's not one of my favorite Star Wars books, but the cover, as you said, is iconic. As for yes, I did call that we would get Vader and specifically that we would get Vader and Maul dueling at the end of this season. I was not alone in making that prediction. There were a couple reasons for it. One was because they had already done the teasing Vader at the end of the season with Rebels season 1, and I thought like that was a little too similar to this. 2 was the fact that they hid the finale title from us, just calling it finale, and once it was clear that this was actually not going to be just a 1-season show, I'm like, they would hide the title for one and exactly one reason, and it's because it references Vader. And then when we got the title card that said the Dark Lord, I was like, fuck yes, with the Duel of the Fates music over it. But also but this was a classic case of the show essentially giving us what we expected, but doing it in a way that I perhaps still found surprising and, unexpected, which was, perhaps my perspective was influenced by, again, our friends at Force Center with this, but like I was so fixated on like the emotional, significance of what it would mean to have Maul and Vader face off, essentially Palpatine's former apprentice and his current apprentice, both of them essentially traumatized and abused and manipulated by this guy, having more in common than they might know, but ultimately like can't bridge that divide because they're trying to kill each other. And yes, the illusion that they keep mentioning about the fact that Maul recognizing that, like, aren't you that little kid that I almost ran down with my speeder bike on Tatooine all those years ago? You are much scarier now. But again, I was so focused on like the emotional significance of what it would mean to have the two in fight and reunite, that I wasn't anticipating they would use Vader exactly in this way, as basically just a unstoppable Terminator-like killing machine. And as you said, like the fact is that when Vader doesn't have something to say to somebody, he's just not going to talk at all. He will talk to Kenobi because he blames Kenobi for everything that's wrong with his life. But even though like Maul might recognize the parallels between the two of them, Vader's just like, you're nothing to me. You are just you are the next person on my mission to eradicate everyone who opposes the Emperor's will. And so, yes, like when Maul has that moment where he's asking him, what are you? Like in a different show, we might have gotten Vader, like give him a quip, referencing Kenobi again. I love the moment in Obi-Wan Kenobi when Obi-Wan asks him, like, what have you become? And Vader spits back, I am what you made me. But in this case, Vader is just like, yeah, I'm not talking to you. I'm here to kill you and take your shit and ruin your hip again. And I do love the fact that ultimately, as even though Maul doesn't recognize Vader at first, I think it's heavily implied by later in the encounter that he does figure it out, where like there's the moment when after they've briefly escaped from Vader and Daki and Devon and talking, we see Maul kind of sitting down the background. He's like, no. It can't be. Yeah. And I'm just like, that is the moment he realizes that like what I feared about, Palpatine essentially using Anakin as the key to all of this and recruiting him to the dark side. He did it. This is Anakin Skywalker. This is the chosen one. I'm
glad they had that moment because I was a little bit like the fact that like, he had the whole plot to kill Anakin just to avoid exactly the situation. I would have been disappointed if it didn't occur to him that's exactly who this is. And I can totally get why he's caught on the back foot initially, because like this is a monster before him that like he doesn't recognize as anything. And but yeah, I like that once he has a moment to collect himself, he's like basically, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit.
And it pays off for the fact that now that he has that piece of knowledge, I think it will definitely come into play later, because I do not believe for a single second this is the last time we're seeing Vader in this series. I think he has to come back later, not only as and I think at some point we're probably also going to get Palpatine, because again, at some point
because it's not even so much for the interplay between Vader and Maul, but because of Devon. I think it's going to be absolutely crucial that he comes back into the story at some point, for the fact that she wants revenge
against him specifically. Yeah. And that can be like the carrot that Maul was using to essentially keep her in his dark graces, is the fact that, like, as he says, you are not strong enough, but I will train you and we will have our revenge. So like that's going to be kind of the promise that keeps Devon on the hook, of the promise of more power to stand up to this unstoppable killing machine that is Vader. So
I was just like, I just got chills when she screams out, "I will kill them!" It was just, oh God.
Yeah, and people have rightly shouted out the fact that, like, for instance, in that moment, what they do with the animation and the voice work, Gideon Aglin's incredible performance, is they actually have her voice like distort in a kind of almost like a monstrous way. And I think we're meant to get even like the briefish flash of like her eyes, like, it not changing color into the Sith eyes, but like it's brewing in there. And yes, I do think that now that again, Maul knows who Vader is. I think that the next time that they cross blades, we will get more of that like emotional component of essentially Maul trying to, needle Vader, much like he does with Mara, because like, you're just another pawn of Darth Sidious. He sent you here to die, just like he did me. Of course, Vader's not gonna. That's not gonna work on Vader. And I don't think the duel was going to go in Maul's favor, because in Rebels he basically is just like, yeah, we can't beat this guy. But it will be I do think the fact that we had kind of a much more like visceral confrontation in this season kind of sets up the possibility of a more emotionally charged confrontation either next season or in the future seasons. And yet you're absolutely right that the Devon factor in all of this is another added wrinkle, because of course, we don't know Devon's fate. Like, it is very possible that if she, for instance, tries to go up against Vader before she's ready, then like that's not going to go well for her. But I hope that we at least, we get a long we get a long lead up to that. For instance, like you had mentioned, like, and we'll talk about this maybe more when we speculate on season 2. I really want to see like the early days of like Devon's fall and Maul's manipulations of her. Because because the emotions are still so raw. I think there will be a little bit of a time skip, but I hope it's not too big. Like, for instance, this is somewhat facetious, but if we pick up in season 2 and Devon's all tatted up and is basically like, I'm Darth Talon now, I'll be a little disappointed that we skipped over some good stuff. I think they're going to do a slow burn, because that's what they did with this season. It was very effective.
Yeah, Peter Griffin asks, how long is this before Solo? I think it's more like, isn't it like 8 to 10 years?
Yeah, no. So essentially, there's a 19-year gap between Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope. Solo takes place. The main story of Solo takes place 9 years after Revenge of the Sith, and Obi-Wan Kenobi takes place 10 years. This show, I think, is implied takes place maybe, I don't know, a year or two after Revenge of the Sith. The timeline's not exact, but you had mentioned, I think it takes place probably after the events of the Bad Batch, because, for instance, we see like the TK troopers that are introduced in the Bad Batch. So I think this is on the early end of the timeline. So we basically have like probably 7 or 8 years to play with before we get to Solo: A Star Wars Story.
Yeah. Which is why I'm fine with them taking, like, I don't necessarily want like I know there was some talk about um the show potentially each season like jumping ahead a couple of years. I don't really necessarily want that. I'd like them to take a slower approach to it, especially since I know that the team behind it says that they really are interested in having this go beyond the sort of typical 3-year limit that's kind of, I guess, had been established, particularly in the wake of the Bad Batch of having that run for 3 seasons. I know they expressed interest in this going for a number of years if they can. So I'm fine with if they take a slower approach to letting the story unfold.
Really, the only reason to do a big time skip is essentially to get to the events of Solo's Star Wars Story and get basically like Kira involved, which again, I would love to see Kira. I would prefer to see her in live action with Emilia Clarke playing her. But especially now that we've seen this full season and it was so effective as a slow burn with Devon's turn, and now that we're so invested in the character of Devon and what's going to happen to her, I'm like, yeah, there's no rush to get to the events of Solo: A Star Wars Story. We already got a little flavor of it with the introduction of Dryden Voss at the end of this season, which I'm sure we'll touch on in a minute. But I definitely don't need us to basically skip to that point in the timeline. I'm ready to space things out.
Yeah, I'll just say that's just another one of, it's silly to hold it against the show, but just one of my few little disappointments is that Paul Bettany didn't return to voice Dryden.
Yeah.
It happens. Like, he's off busy doing Marvel stuff, I know.
Which that was actually one of the reasons I thought we might get him, was because I think he was working on the Vision Quest television series, and I'm like, that's a Disney property. How hard can it be to have him pop down the street into a recording booth and for an hour and say some lines as Dryden Voss? But then, of course,
it's not like it's not, but it's not like it was a lot of lines. They,
yeah.
I don't know. I think they could have pulled it off.
I think they could have. Unfortunately, and this is the thing we often don't want to talk about with these shows, I think it was probably a budgetary choice, because if they had brought in Paul Bettany, they probably would have had to pay him more than they paid Scott White, the actor who voices him in this. And so I'm just like, they probably were like, it's fine, we'll just have him do it. But I was definitely bummed. First one, I mean, I was really excited to see Dryden, because I've been waiting for him to show up in this show. But I was a little, as soon as I heard the voice, I'm like, that's not Paul Bettany. And as soon as I saw in the credits, I was like, oh man, missed opportunity.
Still,
Yeah.
it's still a great victory to have Dryden in the show, because this is, obviously the whole show is one big connective tissue to Solo, but the appearance of Dryden Voss even more so, because then this, all eventually leads to Kira, and then to, Solo. And even if the show doesn't go all the way up to that, it's still nice to see, like, those story elements having an impact on this show. And because it's a story that I was so excited to get more of in the wake of Solo, and then we know that whole story about how things went down, and the fact that I know we've been teased for a long while about a potential Lando show or movie, which may or may not come to pass. But what I really wanted was Maul in the criminal underworld with Kira, and we're not quite there yet. But I think we're going to eventually get there, and this is very much laying the groundwork for Maul's you know, reascension, you know, and before plummeting back down to Earth.
Yes, exactly. And
Um,
I
and,
just
and
want to say,
I love the fact that like um the like Maul or Dryden's perspective on things is like a little overly optimistic at this point
yeah,
because he thinks he's going to be put in charge of Crimson Dawn with Maul's help. And what do we see in Solo, a Star Wars story? That Maul himself runs Crimson Dawn, and Dryden reports to him and is basically like a an underling,
yeah.
and so yeah, he's in for a bit of a rude awakening.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you mentioned that because that's what I wanted to touch on. Is that yes, like Dryden's introduction into this story is basically him essentially seizing an opportunity. One, because he probably heard what Maul did to Marg Krim and reasserting his control over the Pike Syndicate. And he's like, I don't want that to happen to me, but maybe if I can have him kill my boss, this Rentero character, then I can make myself the head of Crimson Dawn. And it's just like, he presents it to Maul as basically like a partnership, a tit for tat deal, like where it's like I hold up my end of the bargain, you hold up yours, and Maul will, I'm sure, honor his end of the bargain and kill Rentero. But yeah, the idea that he thinks that this is just gonna be like this is going to work out for him specifically, and by the end, ultimately it's going to be revealed that like, yeah, no, Maul's like, yeah, now that I've killed the leader of Crimson Dawn, I will let you run it, but you answer to me, buddy. That was really, and I also love Dryden's like tipping his hand in terms of his desperation, where he was basically like, I will come and help you, but our window is short. I'm not here to engage the Empire. If you're not there when I get there, tough luck. But when they get there and the Empire is there, and he's basically just like, I need Maul. And it's because he's like, now that he has this opportunity in his grasp, he's not going to let it go. But of course, when you make a deal with the devil, like you don't get exactly what you bargained for. And so it will be the
Well,
case.
it's like I'm really interested to see the intricacies of like what falls out because Maul is attempting to rebuild the Shadow Collective essentially,
Yes.
but that's not where we find him in Solo. His organization is Crimson Dawn. He's wearing the Crimson Dawn like insignia when Kira calls him. So like he takes over that syndicate, and so it'll be interesting to see what happens, to the other syndicates and like how they factor in. Um, and yeah, I'm just really fascinated to see like how all that plays out. So like, but I just thought it was funny that like Dryden goes from thinking he's going to be running things at Crimson Dawn to then we got to Solo, a Star Wars story, and he's like, you know who I answer to, and he is not going to be pleased.
Yeah, no,
So
I mean, to Dryden's credit, I think that he recognizes that, like, I'll make this work. I will report to Maul, so he will not kill me. But I also think that, like, yeah, it's kind of, I think Maul keeps a tighter hand on Crimson Dawn, but like, I think that it's kind of also been established by the time of Solo's Star Wars story, he effectively has at least some measure of control over all of the criminal syndicates.
okay.
Like we see, for instance, earlier in this show, he basically installed his new Captain Colt as the new leader of the Pike Syndicate, and basically in a Dryden boss-like relationship. And so I'm assuming at some point he will also get his hooks into the Hutt Cartel and Black Sun and the Crymora Syndicate. But yeah, Crimson Dawn seems to be, his favorite. So I think that it's implied again that like the reason he's operating this structure as he is because if he's a little too public with it, then I think Palpatine probably slaps him down. But we mentioned that I think that they will eventually get to the point where Maul and Palpatine reach a kind of an uneasy detente where Palpatine's like, Maul, you can have your criminal empire as long as it does not threaten me and my empire. And I think Maul eventually will accept that. But obviously, we have a long way to go before that happens. So I would be interested to see the kind of the internal politics of these criminal organizations as the show unfolds.
I'm just so excited we're getting to see this.
Yeah.
It's so great. Um, so yeah, do you have any thoughts? I know I mentioned it earlier, but just about like the sort of the visual choice to have this big fight with Vader out in the, you know, in the light of day. And, with that being a stark contrast to sort of the oppressive darkness of most of the rest of the show.
I really liked it because, as you said, like it kind of speaks to essentially a visual metaphor of the fact that all of these truths and connections and relationships between these characters, they were essentially being forged in the darkness of the city streets of Janix, but now it's all out in the open, and that means that these characters are about to show us who they really are. And I also love the fact that, like, for instance, both the scene in episode 9 where they have to cross the toxic waste, and the scene in episode 10 where they're essentially trying to cross the ruins of this destroyed bridge. It's not only a cool visual, but it kind of speaks to the fact that, yeah, like, to navigate this treacherous environment, you need to use teamwork and you need to trust each other. And of course, when you have a former Sith Lord in the group, trust is kind of hard to come by. And so and Maul, again, like, we get him like working with everybody to get them across of the toxic lake, and you think like, oh, maybe Maul can be a team player, and then we get to this again, where the light is shining and people's true selves are revealed, and that's the moment where you're like, no, Maul is going to do, as Daki says, did he help you for your sake or his own? Maul was ultimately out for Maul in the end.
Yeah. Oh God. Um. Yeah. I actually, talking about bridges, that makes me want to jump back for a second and talk about the big, bridge fight in episode 7. I incorrectly, on our last stream talking about this, I said I saw that shot in the trailer, and it
Yeah.
looked like the same bridge on Urbana
Mm-hmm.
from season 7 of the Clone Wars, and I was wrong about that. But so many bridges.
Yeah.
But that's okay because like because because obviously the scope is quite limited location wise. If there wasn't a reason for them to go off planet again, then that's fine. But I just loved the aesthetic of like that fight and so many of the other ones. Oh, and I do want to mention I freaking loved the when Maul, brings all the rocks down on the Inquisitors, and then he leaps out. He does the Sith spinning move.
Yeah, so did I.
That Sidious in Revenge of the Sith looked much cooler here.
Yeah. No, I loved that too, and that they even added the Sidious spinning sound effect as well for good measure. But yeah, it was that was a cool another cool sequence. Although Ken pointed this out on Force Center, and I do take his point. The fact that when they're having this battle and they're literally all standing there firing with these heavy repeating blasters and not seeking cover, I'm like, how are you not all dead right now? But again, that's the suspension of disbelief there.
This
But
is why I'm glad Stev isn't on this chat. He'd be going off about that. He hated that in the early seasons of Clone Wars.
yeah,
When
which
everybody
again,
was out in the open firing at each other.
Yeah, didn't bother me then. It doesn't really bother me now, but I did take the point, particularly like when Scorn was using like his heavy repeater blaster cannon and just spraying fire everywhere. And I'm like, that Mandalorian armor must hold up pretty damn well because they are getting shot a lot. But it was a cool visual, and again, that was another case of like, you know, using the bridge to signify like the trust that you have to make the way across. And of course, in that case, the trust ends up being fractured because the Mandalorian commandos take their opportunity, or some of them do, to flee and steal the ship, and then of course they immediately pay for it with their lives. But that is another case where Maul was essentially, in a strange way, acting almost selflessly, where he's essentially drawing the Inquisitors away from the rest of his followers because he knows that they can't handle them and he can. But as you said, he's definitely, you know, not 100%. Like the moment when he leaps onto that lower bridge and then he falls and immediately like hurts his knee, and it's like that was like a very relatable. It's like, oh, come on, man.
I'm feeling moments like that in a way that I just did not understand back in 1999 as a teenager.
Yeah.
And now I'm like, yeah, I get it. When I stand up from the couch and I'm having to struggle for a minute as I'm walking. Oh yes, getting older. Um, but no, like, you know, and I mentioned this earlier, but the whole thing with the Mandalorians is really fascinating, because as much as I hate the fact that we lost Rook, I think it's interesting that like she is so loyal to him, which is, I don't know, like it's so interesting to look at that and say, on the one hand, it's very admirable, but on the other hand, it's like, you know, you pledged loyalty to this demon looking guy who's not a Mandalorian, who came in and straight up murdered your leader in a fight, and like, and it's these sort of rigid, you know, beliefs of your culture that made him the leader. It's like, you guys aren't on Mandalore, you know, and that ship has kind of sailed. So I don't know. It kind of, on the one hand, it kind of beggars belief, but you have to admire her sense of loyalty all the same. Like, this is the code that she's chosen to live by, and she's going to follow him, as it turns out, to her death. And uh, but I just thought it was really interesting that on the one hand, you got the Mandalorians who are like, this is bullshit, and we're not getting paid enough for this, and in this case we're actually leaving behind our money. We're out. And but then they meet an end which we're not at all displeased about, because you know, but on the, that's so funny, isn't it? Like, we're like, these guys suck for betraying Maul,
Yeah.
um who's a
Yeah.
villain. But it's because, you know, we don't like to see dishonorable Mandalorians in particular. Um, and so, but in that case, they betray Maul, and they look out for their own self-interest, and they meet, you know, a grisly fate. But then we have Rook Cast, who remained loyal, and she arguably meets an even more grisly fate, which just goes to show that maybe you shouldn't follow Maul.
Probably a wise approach, but yeah, like I think what it's ultimately, and again, the Mandalorians are not really the focus of this particular story, but I do think it ties into their larger story about the idea that, you know, now that they're kind of separated away from their home world, like the Mandalorians are kind of, in a certain respects, losing their way, like, no pun intended to the Mandalorians, this is the way reference, but yeah, like, I mean, but that is a major theme of the Mandalorian show, and like the Book of Boba Fett, and like all the shows in that kind of area, is the fact that like now that they have essentially kind of lost, you know, their connection to their home world and their identity, how are they handling it? Some of them are going back and clinging to like religious tradition of this idea that like, no, we need to go back to the old ways. And some of them just basically become straight up like mercenaries, you know. We see that in the Mandalorian show as well. And then we have kind of the people who are essentially trying to do like the honorable thing, the essentially following the leader, the chosen leader. And that is what Rook Cast is doing in this show, because she, as she says, since my lord, since you have claimed the throne of Mandalore, I have followed you without question. Like, that kind of really centers why she's so loyal to him, because ultimately she is loyal to Mandalore, and in her perspective, he is its legitimate ruler. But obviously that is, we know, like, how did he get that? He killed Pre Vizsla and took it by force. And that is ultimately a perspective that the Mandalorians probably need to go away from, as we see in the Mandalorian show, back to, they don't need to go back to the old Duchess Satine pacifism days. I think that was probably an experiment that they will not revisit. But in particular, I think that, like, for instance, it is telling, even though I didn't love the choice when this happened, just because it's such a cool weapon, but like, that's kind of what the destruction of the Darksaber in season 3 of The Mandalorian signifies, is that, like, it's time for us to essentially evolve into a healthier dynamic with our, and unfortunately for Rook Cast, the value of loyalty is admirable, but she gave it to the wrong person, and she ultimately paid for
it. Okay, let's make sure that we don't get through this stream without talking about Two Boots. Because he finally came around.
Took him long enough.
Yeah. And it wasn't the fact that he had his boots taken away.
Yeah.
Maybe that wasn't enough to push him, but it was when Riley was in danger, and when he comes to be told that, what do you out of your mind? Chief Plyce is dead.
Yeah.
And I love the fact that Brander comes up with this, whole prisoner exchange thing, and we know that, like, Two Boots has kind of made that impossible with the way he escapes with Riley, but the fact that, like, Brander still thinks that's the plan, and so he's going on. I just found that really hilarious. Then, as the TK troopers come out and start firing, and Two Boots is like, about that, the deal's off. I just thought it was great, but no, I loved Two Boots, like, his constant, like, I guess I must accept that I am a fugitive from justice now, and I am going to report this immediately. Or perhaps that's not the number one priority right now.
Yeah. It was great that he, even though he finally did evolve beyond his program, he can't let it go entirely. There's still going to be moments. There's even like a little background bickering between him and Vario, like when they're crossing the skiff, where he's basically like, I suppose I must accept that I'm now a little more like you, like a common criminal. And then Spybot's like, damn it. And he's like, no, that is not a good thing. Which is, again, delightful.
Well, moving off of Two Boots just for a second, and like, yeah, I loved that moment from Spybot, because again, this is like very shortly before he's about to be killed, but he was just like, throwing out like all kinds of great, like, yeah, him basically saying that's a good thing, and also when Brander and Riley are having their moment on the skiff, and he goes, ah!
Yeah, that was great. That was great. Also, the no touchy moments.
and also somewhere else in these episodes, he was like, Imperial scum.
Oh yeah, dying. That was when he took out the probe droid, I think. And yeah, and there's also when they're when they're about to assault the Imperials outside the power plant, and Daki, in one of his moments, is like, patience, they will move on. Maul's like, we do not have time for patience. Spybot, go jam their comms so we can kill them. Spybot's like, yes, comms go bye-bye. I'm going to miss this little guy so much.
That was another moment where I was like, really, Daki? Like, we don't have the time.
Yeah, no, that was a case of, it's like, yeah, again, patient being a great Jedi virtue, but this is a case where it's like, yeah, let's go with the. You could almost imagine like Obi-Wan and Anakin having this exact conversation where Obi-Wan would be like, patience, they will move on eventually, and Anakin's like, no, let's just go kill them all and kick the front door.
Which is why when Anakin says, I suggest patience in Revenge of the Sith, and Obi-Wan's like, patience. He can't
Yes.
believe he's hearing that from Anakin.
Yeah, and of course it doesn't work out for Anakin at that moment because he's counting on R2, and then when R2's captured, Obi's like, do you have a plan B?
Yeah. But yeah, no, back to Two Boots. It was so satisfying just to see him finally realize that he has to go against the Empire and his, and protocol and all that. And I'm worried about the situation he and Riley are in at the end of the season. But
Yeah.
yeah, I hope everything's okay with them. Please don't. You killed Spybot. Don't do anything to Boots. Please.
Yeah, I'm actually really interested to see where those two characters go, because of course the charge that Brander gives Two Boots when he, makes his play to essentially allow them to escape is, Two Boots, promise me you'll get him to his mother who works for the Empire. And I'm like, don't do that. That's a terrible idea. But
On one hand, yeah, but which I think adds to the speculation that actually she's not some higher up Imperial.
Yeah, I agree.
Just has just a job somewhere in the Empire. But I get where you're coming from, but I really liked that moment because it felt real. It's like, in spite of everything that's going on, and obviously, Brander's issues with the Empire come to a head and then, backed up and all that. But at the end of the day, of course, as he's about to sacrifice himself, of course he wants his son to be with his mother, regardless of sort of their different philosophies, or how they feel about the tyrannical government that's that's crushing everything. At the end of the day, still the kid's mother. And of course, if he's going to be gone, he wants his son to be with his mother. And so I found that completely understandable, and it just kind of reinforced that at the end of the day, like, family supersedes anything else. And and he knows that, like, his mother's not going to turn her son over to the Empire.
I clarify the reason. Like, I mean, I definitely agree. I don't think Drea is a higher up Imperial officer who would sell out her son. I think she is basically like a data drone working for the Empire. But the reason I'm like, that's a terrible idea, is because Riley and Two Boots are fugitives from the law, and their wanted posters are probably everywhere, and probably taking them to the mother who works for the Empire is not a good idea. Not because she would sell them out, but because she works on, they would probably be recognized and then captured. But who knows? Like I said,
Tactically, it's not a good move.
Yes, yes,
Um,
but I am actually really interested to see what they do with Riley and Two Boots next season, because there are a number of different routes they could go, especially as we both think Brander is probably still alive and trying to get back to his son, because they definitely could bring the mother into the story and have her essentially recognize, what the evils of the Empire. But if they go that route, like, they would be separating Riley and Two Boots from Devon and Maul. And I do think there would actually be an interesting case for keeping Riley in Maul and Devon's orbit, because of course Riley and Devon started to basically form kind of a bond, and Devon is about to go down a very, very dark path. And it could be interesting to see the fact that these two characters who basically lost their father figures are handling that in different ways. And Riley kind of maybe serving as an anchor for Devon of like, what are you doing? Like, you are not the person I met back on Janix. You're becoming angrier and more violent, and like you're changing. So that would, but again, I'm open to whatever they want to do. I just, the fact that they decided to keep Riley and Two Boots, essentially with Maul and Devon at the end of this season, means that I'm interested to see like ultimately what direction are they going to be a big part of the show going forward. I kind of hope they are.
oh, and food for thought. This was a moment that I caught today that I didn't catch initially, but I thought it was rather interesting that they took a moment to to show this. Was that um and I'm sorry, trigger warning, I'm bringing it back up again, when Spybot is killed, um and Maul has that first, like, shocked, sad reaction and then angry. They take a moment to show Two Boots clocking that,
Yeah.
and show his reaction to seeing Maul's, reaction to the death of Spybot. So it almost made me feel like they were going to play off on that in the future with the character of Maul and Two Boots, which I don't know what, that they don't wouldn't seem like candidates like to team up or bond or something. But I don't know, who knows, maybe there is no backup for Spybot, and Maul wants a droid companion. I don't know.
I
but
mean,
but I just thought it was interesting that they took the opportunity to show, like, Two Boots, like, reacting to that sort of emotional moment from Maul. I just was like, that's that feels like something that's maybe might lead to something more.
mhm.
Um, but I don't know. I just thought it was interesting, and since the characters you know are still, and since Two Boots and Riley are still with Maul and Devon, it's, could be something more akin to, like, Grumpy Han 3PO relationship, where maybe Maul is just like, he gets really frustrated with Two Boots, but not enough to, like, kill him. But just like, he gets annoyed, and Two Boots is just trying to help.
Yeah. That would be a fun dynamic,
Yeah.
definitely. There's, these two are not what you would expect to see hanging out together. I love the moment in episode 9 when they're considering Maul's offer, and Two Birds is like, "Yes, this is probably our best chance, but I must warn you, he looks very untrustworthy." You think? You think? And also the great moment when they're in the tunnels, and Brander and Two Boots are talking, and Brander, who has his eyes fully open, tells Two Boots like, these guys are going to double cross us the second we get out of the city, and then it immediately cuts to Maul and Rook talking about double crossing, including Maul.
So what do we do about the old man? Have respect. He is a Jedi Master, and we need him for
For
now.
now. Yeah.
Oh God. Yeah. No. And then I'll just close out by, we haven't talked as much this stream as we did on the last one, but I just want to again just talk about the animation and the technical achievements of the show. I don't know if maybe I just noticed it more on the set on this batch of episodes, or if they got bolder as the show went along, but I just felt like they were really leaning into the impressionistic animation style even more as the show went on, with the painterly backgrounds and and the transitions, and I just, there were moments where I thought I was like looking at like a Van Gogh painting or something, and I just like was like, wow, it's really cool. Um and it just goes to show that like they've just really pushed things so much further with this show than with any other animated show they've done before. And we keep saying that every time they bring out something new. We said it with, Clone Wars season 7, and then with the Bad Batch. I feel like the Bad Batch was almost like a perfection of what they were able to do now with when they came back with Clone Wars season 7. And it was like, how far can we push this? How beautiful, how realistic, and I feel like having achieved that now, they're like, okay, but what can we do that's maybe let's allow ourselves to get a bit more creative and different and do something that isn't strictly striving for realism, but like um just something that's really artistic and unique. And so I'm just astounded, and like especially those final two shots of Devon and Maul just felt like they really leaned on like painting on top of the CG animation. And uh, I was just like, holy shit, the whole time. And just like, and then I remember when I was watching, I think it was the the fight between Maul and the Inquisitors in episode 7, and I was like, just like imagine the me back in 2008 watching the Clone Wars movie, and then somebody time travels to show me this show. I would have been like, holy shit. It's just like such a leap, to see where they've gone. I'm just so incredibly proud of everybody over at Lucasfilm Animation. They've just, the heights to which they've risen is absolutely incredible.
Yeah, no, I mean, they just celebrated their 20th anniversary in the past year or so, and then, it's been 18 years since the Clone Wars movie, and as you said, they've come leaps and bounds since then, even from especially something like even like Rebels, where the animation side was a little bit more simplistic, and this is just like, I'm glad you pulled this image up on the screen, because this was basically like just gorgeous like matte paintings and dark saturated colors. People pointed out its parallels to essentially the scene in The Dark Knight where Batman is on top of the building surveying everything, and Marok is kind of serving the Batman role in this
Did
picture.
not like that when they said that on Force Center, because I was like, no, we're allowed to like call out references to things like Blade Runner from the 80s, but don't remind me that The Dark Knight is almost 20 years old and is influencing filmmakers today. Don't do that to me. It's not fair.
To be fair, I think The Dark Knight was influencing filmmakers within like almost immediately after it came out, because it was just that
Yeah.
iconic. But yeah, this showed this they've talked about the fact that they drew one of the inspirations for Janix was Gotham City, and I definitely felt that not only with these wide shots, but also when they were like down on the street level, particularly once they got into some of the more like run down portions of the city. Like it reminded me of playing like the Batman Arkham video games, particularly when they were like in the area by the Armistice Fountain, and there's a lot of overgrowth and plant life. And I was basically like, I think I've played this level on Batman Arkham Asylum before. I think I'm about to run into Poison Ivy. But in particular, there's the
Also
white.
in fairness to me, I will just say I think that any movie in the last, God, how long? In the last 45 years that has had cityscapes of any kind. I think they're all referencing Blade Runner. So even though I know The Dark Knight has been, and yeah, I'll give it to you. That shot is very, very Batman. Is standing atop, building on Gotham, and like the stuff in the opening episode where like the wires and the ships crashing into him. Like, I will admit, yes, it's all very Dark Knight, but I think a lot of this stuff really does go back to the presentation of Los Angeles in Blade Runner. I just think it's steeped in that, and I don't think any movie, that kind of movie or TV show that is dealing with that kind of aesthetic, can avoid basically getting it from that. I mean, Ridley Scott really pioneered a look when he made that movie.
Absolutely, and it's a great look. So I'm happy
Mhm.
to see it continue to be referenced. But even going from like the wide to the very intimate, like I love the fact that we get so many like close-ups of the characters' faces. Like there's the shot that like when Maul and Devon are facing off in episode 7 before the Empire, when the Empire arrives, and we get Maul's like just a close-up of his eyes before he turns to fight the Empire. And then you mentioned it in the final scene, the way they choose to see it, to shoot it, as Devon is and Maul are kind of just sitting there, and then the camera focuses in and gives us a close up of Devon's eyes, and then a close up of her mouth when she says, "All right, I'm ready." And then we end the season on a close up of Maul's eyes as he kind of, he savors the victory that he has finally won in getting her to choose, to become his apprentice. But it's like, that's the kind of shit that it's like, yeah, they could do this, not even like probably like 5 years ago, and now where we are.
Well, and I mentioned on the last stream, I think that's like, um, something that they're able to do now is like give us actual like character development through the acting, and just you can have a shot that's just a character contemplating something, and like show the wheels turning in their head, and through the eye movement, and everything, that like that was so beyond their reach back in 2008. Like, you know, I'll be completely honest. A lot of the animation in back in the Clone Wars movie and in the first season kind of looked a bit low resolution because they were just getting started, and it was not even close to being up to the standard of like other animation houses at the time, because they just didn't have the resources at the time. And now it's Lucasfilm Animation is just, it might be my favorite animation house, just
Yeah.
because I really love their style and what they do. And so yeah, just it's just mind blowing what they're able to achieve now, and which is why, like, uh, I'm so glad the show has done so well. They and I love what they did with the marketing of the show, like getting, you know, sort of, they played up like Phantom Menace, when like advertising the show, and like to sort of reach out to people who maybe aren't traditionally into animation. Uh and the fact that like the show has been number one on Disney Plus ever since it premiered. And except for one day when the Mandalorian and Grogu preview took the top spot. Understandable. Um, but and from what I understand, it's done really well ratings wise, and I just, I'm so glad that this was, seems, for all intents and purposes, to have been a home run for
Mhm.
Lucasfilm, and I'm just so happy about that. But I hope it emboldens them to do more in the animation landscape, and because we don't, I understand why they wouldn't want to stretch their resources, and I think that's very important. But hopefully they can start to do, give us like, have part of the team work on, some animated movies that won't
Yeah.
take as much time as, as a full blown series. I think that there's so much they can do with animation. That I feel like maybe they're starting to realize that they might want to lean more back into this a bit on the television side of things.
Mhm.
Um, just and then maybe, for the live action stuff, focus on movies for a little while, and because there's just so many stories that I would love to see. And yeah, I want to see Obi-Wan and Satine. I want to see Sons of Dathomir, but I also would love to see some, Luke Jedi Training Academy stuff, and let's do some other eras using, now that Lucasfilm Animation can do all this stuff. I just think it would be really great, and I stand by the fact that I think that, you know Star Wars is kind of, I feel like it's not always, but like there are certainly live action things that are spectacular, but you know, I think that they're able to do so much in the animation realm that pushes beyond their capabilities, for live action, especially in terms of scale. Um, I think the animation side of Star Wars has sort of done the best at capturing sort of George Lucas's vision with the prequels, and the vast landscapes, and the feeling of a really large galaxy. And it's just, there's practicalities when you're making a live action television show that you can't quite do the things you can do in animation. So I hope they look at the reception of the show and say, let's do more.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, especially now that, as you said, that there seems to be a focus towards on the live action front, getting Star Wars back on the big screen. We are only less than 2 weeks away from The Mandalorian and Grogu. We have Starfighter coming. Please God, let us get that Rey Skywalker movie sooner rather than later. And obviously, I've loved all the live action Disney Star Wars shows, but it is telling that after we get Ahsoka season 2 later this year, there's nothing else that's been announced or confirmed on that front. And to be fair, there's not a ton else on the animated side either, but like at the very least, we know we're getting a season 2 of this show, and we're going to get the Visions, the Ninth Jedi series. And I would hope that, yes, if they do decide to take a little bit of a step back from live action Star Wars on Disney Plus, that they at the very least recognize that like the animation style is always going to be there, particularly for the diehard fans, because one of the reasons there's always such a positive community around the Star Wars animation, yes, it's because the shows are great, but it's also because a lot of the bad actors in the Star Wars fandom just don't watch the animated stuff because they think it's for kids. And so
Yeah.
we get to have a little bit more of a peaceful experience when in loving the show. Not that we're trying to gatekeep. It's just like, if you're going to be here, like, actually try to engage with the story that's presented to you and not just kvetch. But regardless, I think that this has been a triumph for Star Wars animation. I said at the beginning of the stream that this is, I think, one of the strongest seasons of any Star Wars television show, like top to bottom. In terms of animated stuff, I would put, like, I think the previous pinnacle for me was season 2 of The Bad Batch. I just thought that season was incredible. But this is definitely right up there. And I would even put it up against, things like, in this, at least in the same ballpark as things like, both seasons of Andor and the Obi-Wan Kenobi series. And I loved, first season of Ahsoka and Skeleton Crew and all that stuff. So I ride for the Book of Boba Fett. But this was something special, and I'm so glad that we are getting essentially a continuation of this story. And yeah, it turns out Darth Maul was a pretty damn popular character, and the show based on him is gonna do well. So let's lean into it, and please let us. Yeah, go ahead.
This was another thing I was thinking of when I was watching the last episode today. I was like, again, go back to but instead of 2008, go back to the kid made from 1999, and light who's just gained and lost Darth Maul in real quick succession, and then show him, don't worry, this is the future for the character, and show him like the fight between Maul and Vader. I'd be like, what?
Incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah. It sounds like we're kind of wrapping up, but I did want to just do a couple of quick hits. One, we haven't talked much about Vario on this stream because he's more of a comedic relief, but I have to shout out his "You're not small, you're super tall. You're not small, you're super tall." moment. Like, again, talk about things we never would have thought we would see in Star Wars anime. It's like, not only is Darth Maul going to survive and we're going to get this incredible animated show with him and he's going to fight Darth Vader, but he's also going to have a bantering dynamic with a little, like, Alina, like, Raps Tyrell character, crime boss from the Phantom Menace. It's just like, yes, only in Star Wars animation could you see this. In terms of other just, like, cool badass moments, I have to shout out two moments. One, the scene when they're escaping in the speeder chase and they're being pursued by the gunship, and Daki gets the moment where he gets to throw the speeder bike into the gunship and destroy it, and you're like, that's just like a fuck yes kind of moment. And another fuck yes moment on the dark side, this was in the trailer, but the moment when Maul throws his lightsaber and uses it to cut 3 stormtroopers in half and then catches it and ends immediately back to fighting Marok, you're just like, so cool. So cool, man. And then a very, very small moment. I can't, not to give him props, because again, the character is an awful fascist, but people have shouted out the moment when Two Boots is carrying the empty cup and Lieutenant Blake like grabs it from him and thinking he's going to take his coffee. He's like, "This is empty." I love that. So many great little moments like that.
Yeah, no, the chase scene with the vehicle, the Devon steals. I want to shout out the music in that scene, which is a banger. Yeah. I actually forgot that that music was there, and then I was listening to the soundtrack and I was like, where is this from? Like, when does this music show up? And then I was watching the show today and saw that it accompanies that chase scene, and I'm like, that's really cool. Which is a good opportunity to once again shout out the Kiners for their extraordinary work with this show. I have a little, bone to pick that the soundtrack isn't longer than it is. It's a little over an hour long. They've released like 4-hour soundtracks before, so I don't know why. Maybe it was a budget thing. Maybe there's reasons why they couldn't put more on the album, but there was so much good music in this show that I was just a little bummed at that. But it's still a really good soundtrack, and the score throughout the show is just great. I love, they kind of held back on, to use Duel of the Fates for certain moments this season. They used it in the beginning, and then they also used it with over the title card for the opening of the last episode with Vader, which I thought was really great. And then I loved like hearing stuff like motifs from Revenge of the Sith, like with Devon when she sees Daki killed, and it's very recalling some of the music from Anakin's fall to the dark side, and so I love it. It's so amazing to me that there will be people who are Star Wars fans who don't know who the Triners are. Like, and like they've written more Star Wars music than anybody else. And it's just insane. And then like, and for me, like, if you're not going to have John Williams, it should be the Triners, because I just think that they're absolutely extraordinary. And yeah, I was really excited to see what they were going to cook up for this show, and I am immensely happy with what we got, and looking forward to what they cook up for season 2.
Yeah. Although I will add, Ludwig Göransson's pretty good at this Star Wars music stuff too. But I really loved what the Kiners did with the music here. I think that Kevin and Sean and Deanna have really come into their own and not only use the existing Star Wars themes that we're so familiar with, but use them basically as inspiration to start off and like develop more powerful emotional tracks, and yes, also to do something completely different, like that, like kind of techno beat music with the chase scene. And the other thing I will just say about the soundtrack was I absolutely love, even though it's kind of a horrible twist of the knife, that yes, you look at the title of the music that plays when Daki meets his end against Darth Vader, and they call it A Noble End. And call back to the Qui-Gon's noble end of it all. Still hurts. At the least in this time, they didn't spoil it and call it Daki's noble end, but it's like, we know what you're referencing here.
It would have been really funny if they did that.
Yeah, but of course, they didn't release the soundtrack till after the show was out, whereas the big problem with the Qui-Gon's noble end was they released the soundtrack before the movie.
Yeah. Yeah, before we close this out, I do want to say, like, obviously Maul has no issue with killing any Jedi it comes across, but it's like there does seem to be this dual thing where like he knows he's going to be all too happy to dispatch Daki, when the time comes, to suit his agenda. But does also seem to be a respect he has for Daki as well. And I'm just like, we've only ever heard him sort of invoke Qui-Gon when he's taunting Obi-Wan.
Mm-hmm.
I actually wonder, like, what his actual feelings on Qui-Gon Jinn, like, are. Like, that's just one of those things that I'd like to hear him speak. I don't know what the context would be or anything, but yeah, and I just wonder if if Qui-Gon had his respect, or or I don't know. It's just one of those random things where I'm like, I wonder what Maul thinks about this.
Yeah, I mean, I think his perspective has probably evolved, because I'm sure when he was fighting him back in the Phantom Menace, he's basically just like, this is an obstacle. This is finally my chance to, prove how skilled I am and kill a Jedi Master. But now, of course, the thing is that like his kind of burning hatred and need for revenge against the Jedi was instilled in him by Sidious, and now that he's kind of recognized that Sidious has pulled the wool over his eyes and manipulated him, even though he cannot shake the patterns that Sidious has imbued in him. It does seem like his perspective on the Jedi has evolved. I mean, he's never gonna like respect, or he's never going to have anything with Kenobi. Like, Kenobi is like a singular fixation of his, but it's understandable. The man cut him in half. But it does seem like his perspective has evolved, where he's now more open to working with Jedi. Like, he would have worked with Ahsoka. He wants to recruit Devin. He is he's willing to tolerate working with Daki, while ultimately, recognizing that eventually we're going to need to get rid of this guy. But it does seem like on that front, his perspective has evolved, even though he's never going to like give their philosophy credence, because he then would basically be admitting that his whole his own house of cards is about to crumble. But I actually do think that if he thinks back on someone like Qui-Gon Jinn, he probably recognizes what a skilled, warrior he was, and like how, it was. I mean, that was essentially like that was a pinnacle of Darth Maul's life, that he took down a Jedi Master as strong as Qui-Gon Jinn, and of course, it immediately follows the crash that he then falls to Obi-Wan, but yeah, it would. I don't know what context it would be in either. But I like to think that whenever Maul thinks back on Qui-Gon, he thinks that was a worthy adversary.
Yeah. I don't know. It's so funny that that's important for me. So he murdered him.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's because I just like, it's really fascinating when you have like an evil character who nonetheless has sort of like their own code, and like respecting one's adversaries is like a very sort of common trope in in stories like that, um and not trope in a bad way, like it's effective for a reason, and so I like to think that he in retrospect has respect for Qui-Gon. um but and you mentioned Obi-Wan, and like it's yeah, he burns with so much hatred for Obi-Wan, but then it's interesting that once Obi-Wan finally kills him for good,
Mm-hmm.
It's like, even though he's not letting go of his hatred overall, because his dying words about Luke are, he will avenge us, but I think in that moment he finally lets go of his hatred for Obi-Wan, and is just like, um once revenge is no longer an option, it's almost like there's this sort of brother relationship between them. It's like you and I have been on opposing sides, and we both shared this sort of critical moment that I wish had gone my way, but it went your way, and I've been trying to reclaim my position ever since, by like by getting revenge on you. But now that's all gone. I'm dying, and I'm looking for some words of comfort from you. And Obi-Wan gives it to him. And so I think that is such a fascinating relationship. And then once again goes to show that, like, if Maul had been able to like have more self-awareness, and like actually learn, from his mistakes, and take the right lessons from sort of these moments of clarity, and all that, it almost makes you wonder like what the dynamic between him and Obi-Wan could be. And yeah, it's just really interesting to think about. I just love the fact that his life ends being cradled in Obi-Wan's arms, and just the sort of closeness between the two of them in that moment.
I mean, as we know, the line between love and hate, like, they are not opposites of each other. A lot of times, the line can blur, and I do think that as much as Maul rightly hates Obi-Wan Kenobi, I think he also kind of almost needs him in a way. It's very much like kind of like a Joker Batman dynamic in that respect. And yes, I think it would. Since we were talking about therapy earlier, I do think there would be a lot to be said for forcing Obi-Wan and Maul to go to couples therapy. Maybe with a shield, maybe with an energy shield.
I would absolutely die to have somebody write that script and have Sam Witwer and
James Arnold Taylor,
like deliver that. I think that would be amazing.
I'm honestly shocked that no one has done this as like a parody skit. Maybe they have. The internet's a vast place, but yeah, like put a like a Naboo power generator energy style shield between them, and then just make them talk to each other, and maybe they would work things out. Um,
Oh my
I,
god, I want that so much.
yeah, it would be rough in the beginning. It's like, you killed my master. You cut me in half. You killed the woman I love. You took everything from me, and I was once going to be the Dark Lord of the Sith, and I'm a spider legs. It's just, but yeah, it would be phenomenal, but probably a little too meta for something, but for something like to actually happen in the Star Wars
I,
galaxy.
I
But
I don't know. Well, no, not like
yeah,
officially as
yeah,
canon,
I know, but
but
I'm
like
just.
as a fun thing, like Sam Witwer was on James Arnold Taylor's Clone Wars conversations, so, and they did the scene from The Princess Bride
Yeah.
where it was when Inigo is offering to help Wesley up from the cliff, and it was hysterical. And somebody even did like a really simple like 2D like animated rendering of that to go along with their voices, and it was absolutely hysterical. And so, like, I think they should be talked into doing it.
Yeah. Maybe for
Somebody just
maybe for
has to write it.
yeah. Well, maybe we can do it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just since you mentioned Sam Witwer, I before we wrap up, I really, and maybe we'll do a bit of speculation, but I really do want to make sure that we get a full shout out to the incredible voice cast of this series, led of course by the iconic Sam Witwer, but also Gideon Adlon. I thought she was phenomenal as Devon. I can't wait to see how she handles Devon's continuing evolution as a character. Dennis Haysbert fucking killed it as Daki. Like I'm so bummed that, like, even though I
I
was expecting Daki to die, like I'm so bummed that Dennis Haysbert's not going to be back for season two.
Well,
Um,
what really warmed my heart was seeing him like giving interviews at like the premiere of the like
yeah,
they did a showing of the final episodes and stuff, and seeing how excited he was to be part of Star Wars. Like, and it's
yeah,
not a surprise that anybody is excited to be part of Star Wars, but it's just to see like these esteemed actors sort of revert to being kids in their
yeah,
excitement about being in this stuff. It's just, it really warms my heart, and I've been a fan of his for so long. So yeah, it sucks that we're not going to get more Daki, at least not in this story. There could be stories that take place before this where we uh get him, but even if like this is all, like, what a performance he did. He was
yeah.
just so great.
Yeah, no, he instantly becomes like one of my favorite like Jedi masters that we've seen in the Star Wars canon. Continuing down the list, the great Wagner Mora as Brander Lawson. Again, like I think he's coming back for season two, but even if he by some chance he doesn't, what an incredible performance as Lawson. The great David Collins as Spybot. Obviously, David Collins is a staple of the Star Wars, sound effects community, but he did some incredible voice work as well. I think he had also voiced a droid in like the Force Unleashed video game, so he has worked with Sam Witwer before. Chris Diamatopoulos as Ludi Vario, again, very comedic, fun performance. The staples of Star Wars animation, like Vanessa Marshall as Rook, and Stephen Blum as Icarus. Smaller role, but obviously, he'll be back. Stephen Stanton, Clancy Brown got to show up here. Scott White as Dryden Voss. But ultimately, like, just this was such a rich cast. Charlie Bushnell voiced Riley, I should say, and Pamela Adlon as Rena
Yeah,
Sue.
I was going to say let's not leave out Pamela Adlon because
Yeah.
uh, she's great, and I very much believe she'll be returning next season.
Yes.
Uh,
Yeah, I hope so, and I can't wait to see that character. And yes, maybe Lawson and Rena will get to go on that dinner date that I want for them so badly. Also, Ben Diskin is another Star Wars animation staple. He voiced Kebris, who, again, that character meets a just fate, but Ben Diskin voiced AZ3 in the Bad Batch and Clone Wars, so I love him. But yeah, I mean, everyone here is just so good, and obviously we have AJ Lacasio as Marek. He did a good job too. And then the team behind it, obviously the writers. You mentioned Jennifer Corbett earlier. Love that she came back on this show. Matt Miknovitz is the head writer, but we also got Brad Rao and Chris Yost and Julia Cooperman and Amanda Rose Munoz, and then the staples of Star Wars animation direction: Nathaniel Villanueva, Saul Ruiz, Stuart Lee, and a newcomer, I think, Tatiana Drury Cameron for one episode. And then, of course, the man in the cowboy hat himself, Dave Filoni, who, even though he didn't write any episodes, he has the created by Dave Filoni credit on this show. And obviously, he's very hands-on with it. And this is a well-deserved feather in that cowboy hat of his continuing triumphs in Star Wars.
I talked about this over on Force Center when we were calling into the sort of air our grievances about the Star Wars Celebration ticket fiasco. And I was reminiscing about the one and only Star Wars Celebration I've been to, which was Celebration 5 in 2010. And I went to a panel about that was introducing Clone Wars Season 3. And they showed a preview that was the preview that introduced Savage Opress. And like, that was such a big deal. It's like, oh, a guy that's kind of like Darth Maul. We didn't yet, have the inkling that Darth Maul himself would come back. But I just remember seeing Dave Filoni on stage in the cowboy hat. And I that's a very happy memory I have. So like, thank you, like, Dave, for being a part of this for so many years. Obviously, George brought him on for Clone Wars, but I feel like Dave has really, steered this ship in just absolutely wonderful directions. And I'm like glad he seems determined to keep, Star Wars animation going for many, many years.
Yep, I feel like now that he has the big job, now that he's the co-president along with Win-Win Brennan, there's so many good things to come, I'm sure, but one of the biggest wins from that is that we know that Star Wars animation won't be going anywhere, because he will always fight for and champion it.
Yeah. All right. I think that wraps things up. I just I'm so happy this show was so great. I've been hoping for this for years, and I manifested it. And I'm just so glad it came out as well as it did, and looking forward to season 2. And now that the countdown begins, Jared, we get to look forward to our other Star Wars shows this year. We've got we've got the Ninth Jedi, the limited animated series, which I can't wait for. And then, are we getting Ahsoka season 2?
We are getting Ahsoka season 2 this year. They haven't announced exactly when, but Dave Filoni was interviewed on the red carpet and he basically more or less confirmed that yes, we will. He knows when it's going to premiere, but he won't tell us because he's tricksy that way. But yeah, I have a hunch it'll probably be in the fall, would be my guess. Apparently they're doing one of those Shakespeare adaptation books of like Ahsoka season 1, and that's coming out in September. And I kind of think they might be doing that as a prelude to Ahsoka season 2 coming out around that time. I kind of feel like we might get Ninth Jedi like at the end of the year, but who knows? Maybe it'll come before Ahsoka season 2. But regardless, we before all that, we've got the Mandalorian and Grogu in less than 2 weeks, so plenty of Star Wars good stuff to come.
I'm so excited. Like, I've gotten more and more excited the closer we've gotten to it. And I just, yeah, I cannot wait to go back to the movie theater in 2 weeks and just get to experience a big Star Wars adventure on the big screen. I've got my IMAX ticket ready to go. So
I I'm so jealous that you get to see it in IMAX. Unfortunately, there's not an IMAX theater near where I live, but I will be there opening night regardless.
yeah. All right. So thank you everybody who tuned in tonight. If you're watching later, thank you very much. So yeah, so next week we're getting back to Outlander. Are you excited to dive into season 2, Jared?
I am excited. I have managed to, stay spoiler free, but also hold off on watching any more of the episodes. But I'll be diving in this week, and yeah, interested to catch up with where Jamie and Claire and everybody is. We left off because it was a big cliffhanger in the sense of they were sailing off to France, I believe, and so. When we pick up there, I'm going to be interested to see what adventures await.
And for those following along with this, we're actually going to be discussing the first 7 episodes of the season next week, which is sort of even though they did air all the episodes together, back when season 2 premiered, I feel like it has 2 distinct chapters, and so we'll be tackling the first of those chapters next week with the first 7 episodes. So looking forward to that. And then the week after that, we're going to be talking about the Mandalorian and Grogu.
Nice.
So yeah,
very, very excited.
yeah. So definitely come join us for that as well. Yeah, then that's all I got. You got anything, Jared?
No, just again, this was a delight. The show, we had high expectations for it, and sometimes that can be dangerous. But this show met them all easily, and I'm so glad that we are going to know the show is continuing on. I have a feeling that because season 2 was announced so soon after, even before season 1 premiered, that we will probably get it, next year, hopefully around this time. And that'll be sweet, and then going forward, we will have plenty of Star Wars to talk about on this channel, even though we've now gone through all the movies. Now we're getting another one, and we'll have Ahsoka and the Ninth Jedi, and who knows, maybe we will even circle back to something like the Obi-Wan Kenobi show, which we've talked about before on a different channel. But I think that eventually we're gonna have to scratch that itch too.
All right. So yeah, we will see you guys next week. I hope you have a wonderful night, and may the force be with you.
Always.